may not be done. We're doing the closed session. I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. I'm going to call this meeting to order. And with that, I'm going to see if there's any public comment on the closed session, which I look like there's probably not. So with that, we'll move into closed session. However, Lauren requested that we wait just a moment so she can snap a photo of the new board before we step in the back room.
Oh, good idea.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
You going to use your phone, or are you going to use?
I'm just gonna use
Yeah, go for it.
Where do you want us to
By the flags.
Okay, I'm going to bring us into open session. And Jim, is there anything to report from the closed session?
Yeah, staff and legal counsel met with the board and met with staff and legal counsel, and the item was in a closed session. No action was taken. That requires disclosure under the Brown Act.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. And who would like? I'll tell you. I'll lead us today. Please follow me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Can I get a roll call, please?
Director Vallejo.
Present.
Director Heyman.
Here.
Chairman Konsinski.
Here.
Director Lovingood.
Here.
Vice Chair Gleason.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, this time I want to open up for public comments. This is reserved for public to address the board on matters not on the agenda. No action will be taken on non-agenda items unless authorized by law. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. So if I have anybody from the public, now's the time to step forward.
Good morning, Sophia Merck. Thank you all for coming this long distance. I appreciate you being here. I have some concerns about the number of closed sessions that we're starting to have. When the DWR was put in charge of the GSA, they talked about transparency to the public. I truly believe that 2 closed sessions is more than enough. Pretty soon the whole thing is going to be a closed session, and we still need to get our work done. We have a lot to do, and we're not going to get it done in all these closed sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Hi, Tim Parker, and I'm a consultant to Indian Wells Valley Water District. I'm also a member of the Groundwater Resource Association of California Board of Directors, and we have a second annual Groundwater Sustainability Agency Summit we're putting on June 5th and 6th in Fresno, and I'm pleased to announce that I have secured a $25,000 grant from a foundation to pay the registration of certain GSA members, and we're going to be looking. We're going to put an application on the site, so we'd like to encourage GSAs to apply for this, to attend. And so we're going to try to distribute it throughout the state. The GSA Summit is designed specifically for GSAs to network and bring information on a variety of topics. So I would encourage, especially we're going to give some preference to committee members and members of the community to attend as compared to GSA board members. Sorry, guys, but we would like to encourage further communication amongst all the GSAs. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, and thank you for your attention for that matter.
Thank you, Tim.
Good morning, Elaine Mead.
There's been talk about the certain wells in the valley going up as much as 2 feet from the last time that DWP had releases of excess water in our valley. My question today is the county or the groundwater authority going to try to do anything to capture any of that water, or at least hold it back, slow it down, so that we get more of a recharge? And then also, is there going to be anything that would enable us to actually track how much water is helping out the wells along the washes? Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Ralph Lockenmeyer. I'm a resident of Ridgecrest, ratepayer on the for the district. I've got here the Navy letter, and I listened to Mick Gleason talk to the Democratic Club this past Saturday about it and other issues. Anyway, I would like to ask the Navy representative, where are you going from here with the letter? There's a couple of things. The Navy deems groundwater resources as the #1 encroachment issue. I understand that the word encroachment has special meaning for federal agencies, and gives them rights to do a lot of things. Second thing I'd like to mention is the sentence that says, "We must emphasize the importance of Navy civilian and military personnel's continued access to economically viable potable water as critical to the IWV GWA's implementation of SGMA." What is the Navy's plan for going forward? How are they going to act on the importance of Navy civilian water, the town of Ridgecrest, that sort of thing? Are you going to pay for importing water? Are you going to just pump water ad infinitum, since that gives you a right to do that, as I understand it? Any comments?
John, before we comment, let me get our legal response, whether we can even go in that direction yet.
He can give a brief response to it, but he should not engage in an open discussion because it isn't on the agenda, but he can provide some brief summary answers to those if he likes.
Right now, we are working with the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority. We've provided our numbers that we can use on the installation that meets our mission, plus future growth. The rest of it, we're working with the authorities to come up with an allocation that's sustainable for everybody.
So sustainable for everybody. How about affordable?
That's part of what the authority will have to work with.
So you're not willing to comment on any action you're taking further than that?
That's our current action, is working with the authorities.
Yeah, that's pretty unsatisfying, but thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further comments from the public? Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and move on to the consent agenda. This is approval of the board minutes from February 21st, 2019, and approve the expenditures as follows: $99,360 for RWG Law, $3,000 for Brown Armstrong Accountancy Corporation. I believe that was for the audit. Is that correct? And then we have 3 invoices from DRI: $15,604, $20,599, and $6,455. Do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll move it.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any comments or such? If not, I'm going to call for a
I'm going to
vote.
abstain since I wasn't in attendance.
Okay. All right. So any more comments on it before we move along for a vote? Okay. Do we need a roll call vote on this, Jim? No. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And we had one abstention? Okay. Thank you. Okay, number 7. I'm looking forward to this one. Discussion approval revised 2019 budget. So I'll turn it over to you, Don.
Okay. I think this is going to go up on the screen. Is that right? I know it's in the packet, but
There it is. Nope.
it may not be legible. I don't know. All right. So we took a little different approach on putting this together. Before, I know all eyes focus on that number on the right-hand corner, but let me explain it a little bit. Our staff went through and basically reworked the budget from the start using the tasks in the POEM, as you can see. Each of those POEM tasks had a budget assigned to it from Stetson. We also looked at the real appropriations going forward, the projected revenues going forward, and starting with the actual beginning balance, which you see at the top. We, on the left-hand side is the budgeted numbers for each of the POEM tasks, and also you'll notice near the bottom there are several items listed that were tasks that weren't in the POEM that cost Stetson has incurred. We went back and you see the prior charges prior to 2018 as well as the 2018 charges to those tasks. And then we're showing numbers for 2019. Now, one thing I want to make sure and point out, if you look at, and again, it's not up, and I apologize, but for those of you that have the packet, we have under revenue Prop 1 grant monies, a total of $2,146,000. And you'll see in the budget, $931,325 is what is projected. Best guess at this time, what will come in terms of reimbursements for that grant. Stetson projected 3 separate payments. The first one, somewhere around $340,000, which should come in maybe in May, something like that. So of that, we still have $1,214,675 coming through in reimbursable through that grant. So, I mean, ideally, we probably could show another column to the right, which would be 2020 revenues and expenses. The tasks on the POEM, our plan is supposed to be submitted by the end of this year, so many of those costs will go away. I think I know what you're seeing here is more an issue of timing of expenses and timing of revenue when you look at that bottom line. If you take that, the reimbursables that we going forward of $1.2 million roughly. Secondly, look at the assessment pumping fee, which is a total of $1,522,348, of which we're showing anticipating collecting roughly $763,000 this year. That leaves a balance of $637,623. So adding those two together, we have additional revenues that don't show on here clearly. I mean, they're in there, but you have to do the math. $1,852,298. So I've been assured by our chief financial officer that when all is said and done in terms of the expenses and the revenues coming in, we're likely looking at somewhere around maybe an $80,000 deficit. And I would point out at the bottom, we did include, in the anticipation that we go forward with the water marketer, we did include the $230,000 for that in the budget as well. I don't know if there's any other questions or.
Well, I maybe. Okay. So what you're saying is that what I'm seeing on expenses is what we anticipate to spend out through the end of the year to get the plan completed and ready to go. So in other words, any anticipated expenses for 2020 will be minimal.
Minimal going forward into 2020, and the time, and again, the revenues coming in. We've got $1.8 million plus coming in beyond 2019.
Right. So
there could be more coming in as a result of the grant, but this is kind of a conservative estimate. The other thing, another thing to consider, the money, the funding for the water marketer. I don't know if that would all be incurred this year. Some of it could carry forward, anticipating the contract, by the time we get a contract in place and they get started, some of that maybe move forward.
Okay. So even though
We
this
did
is...
include, at the request of your board last month, we did include the PAC and Tech meeting costs. You'll notice a cost of $7,470. It's based on assumptions of PAC meetings lasting about 2.5 hours on average, and TAC meetings about 3.5 hours. We added 25% because of a comment that I think Mr. Johnson made, that there may be a need to accelerate the pace of those meetings, have a couple of extra meetings. So that cost is in there, and I point out it's an unbudgeted, that really is an unbudgeted cost, something that could or couldn't be included.
I take it there's a lot of unbudgeted costs, though, when you look at the support by Stetson for brackish water, imported water coordination. All those were sort of not part of the POAM, correct? But they were budgeted because we knew they would come up. So I guess what I'm asking for, if you were to project this out through the end of 2020, what you're saying is we'll be about $80,000 short.
That's what
Okay.
it shows, yes.
All
And I want to make sure and point out that staff, Ty Staley is here, the CFO, if there's some questions I can't answer. Diana Nguyen also participated in this. They spent a lot of hours basically going all the way back to every invoice that was submitted by Stetson and anybody else, looking at the individual task and making sure that those costs were properly allocated to the task. So they put a lot of effort into this, so I just want to acknowledge the work that they did.
Yeah, I want to thank your staff as well, because I know they went back and pulled in all the income, all the expenses, and categorized them and placed them everywhere they need
Right,
to be.
and thanks to Heather from Steve's staff as well, because she was instrumental in helping
Okay.
us get the information.
So what we're seeing here is a
So
pretty-
even though there's the 963,583, it's showing we're in the red. Again, it's more of a timing issue of when the revenue comes in and the expenses. For example, I can point out when we just approved the consent agenda this last month, we collected a total of $189,000 roughly in pumping fees from October through February. That amount was swept into the county account to make payments. After we paid the invoices that were approved at the February board meeting, there was $64,609.05 remaining in that account to pay the invoices that were submitted. One invoice that we ended up pulling with Steve's approval, if we were to include the 3 DRI invoices, the RWG Law invoice, the Brown Armstrong invoice for the audit, and the Stetson, the total was $144,222.70. We obviously didn't have enough in the account at this time. So I talked to Mr. Johnson. He agreed to defer their most recent invoice. One issue we're having, of course, with the pumping fee is this is the slow season for pumping, so we're not bringing in the revenue like we would during the summer. So we've been bringing in the March pumping fees, and of course the big one that's out there yet is the reimbursable from the Prop 1 grant on the order of $340,000. So when that comes in, we'll be in better shape. But just to point out, we're kind of running a little low right now in the account.
couple of quick questions. The legal services, is that strictly for Mr. Markman's services?
Which one?
It doesn't have a line. It's called Legal Services, Task 7.
Number 7, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Also, the following one, Stakeholder Authority Coordination. Can you explain that just a bit? Again, Steve, maybe? That's called Task Number 8.
Oh, that's your support of the...
Yes, Stakeholder Authority Coordination. Is that just
Task
the work?
number 8.
Yeah, that's for the board meetings and the tax, to a certain extent the PAC, the board meetings and the PAC and tax. And understanding that's a poem budget for the whole thing. A lot of that's already been expended.
Okay, great. And of course, the last question I have, and I'll ask the rest of the board, is the PAC and TAC meeting cost. That's strictly for meeting here at City Hall, correct? That's all. That's just the cost we project that if they met here at City Hall, that would cost us. Is that correct? That's the third to the last line item. The $7,470. That's strictly the cost that we'd be paying the city.
That's the cost to facilitate holding the PAC and TAC meetings in this facility as opposed to the Water District Board meeting.
Okay.
There is no cost to the board for that.
All right. I have some other questions, but I'll hold it until the rest of the board has any comments or questions. Okay, you would like the public talk first. Does the rest of the board agree? Turn over to public? Then it's open to the public. Are there any public comments?
Wow.
Renee West of Lusk. I have a question regarding the Prop 1 grant. This 2019 budget hinges on that. To date, we haven't really received anything from Prop 1, correct?
Correct.
And so we're waiting and waiting and waiting. We've been waiting for over a year to get the money. And so I'm kind of nervous about depending on that money coming in anytime soon.
Well, I maybe Steve can chime in, but the invoice was just submitted in January, and there's comments. There's a process of the state reviewing it, coming back with comments, responding to those comments. So that's the process that's going on right now. As I said, and Steve can correct me if I'm wrong, but we're looking at probably May before we get the first payment on the invoice that we submitted, which would be around $340,000. After that first one, I think it should go much smoother.
Hopefully, yeah. Yeah, just real quick, in response to what Don just said, we're actually a little ahead of schedule on getting the money from the state. We'd actually projected on cash flow that maybe June. So the relationship we have right now with DWR staff is pretty good. They had several hiccups in preparing both their invoicing procedures and their progress report procedures. They changed them after we were working on them. They changed what they wanted submitted a couple of times, so it took a little while to pull that together and get consistency with what we were doing and what they wanted. We got all that in. We've gone through a couple of rounds of comments. I'm going to give a report a little later with an overhead. But just as Don pointed out, the most recent discussion with DWR staff, with Jennifer, who we're working with, Heather's working directly with Jennifer. They have a pretty good relationship, and certainly with Lauren and all our people here. We just got their last set of comments on the invoice, I think middle of last week. We expect to have that invoice rerun and back to them by next week. Jennifer at DWR has indicated that she needs a week to 2 weeks to review it. Then it goes in for their management review, which she says should not take more than 45 days. So, based on all of that, we should have it back to them by the end of the month, and then hopefully 45 to 60 days, we should get a check. That's where we are now.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any more? Hey.
Hi, Alan Christensen with the County of Kern. I apologize, I can't pull up the document that you're looking at electronically. I had it, but it's not pulling up. So I have a question. There was a comment made that about expenditures for that you were $80,000 short as of at the end of 2020. Is that what I heard? Was that right?
That's correct, right?
Okay.
Yes.
Does that include, and I apologize, I should have it in front of me, but does that include the loan paid back to the County of Kern? $500,000?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Derek Hoffman from Meadowbrook. I just want to thank the Water District for the hard work you put into looking at these numbers and coming back with a revision. We appreciate that. And I just had one question. It's really a follow-up question on what I've asked a few times before. And regarding Task 6, under Administrative Tasks, there's a line there, City of Ridgecrest reimbursement. I see it listed under POAM for $210,466. And then there's an asterisk that says to be paid in out years. So I just had a question what that was intended to mean. And then my second question is whether any of that will be in kind. And if not in kind, why not in kind? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Don, I'll let you answer the first part, but I'll try to address the
I don't know if I should defer to the city, but my understanding in talking to the city manager was that this is basically a placeholder. Ultimately, they want to be reimbursed, but I think the timing is open for discussion. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding, that we're just pushing it back a little, an unknown exact amount of time at this point, but we're willing to set it back.
And like I said, Derek, there's a few questions I'm going to ask after we get through this that has to do with any kind of in-kind and not-in-kind, and I will be addressing, I'm hoping to address that. Okay, any more from the public? Okay, Board have at it. Okay, Mick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Mr. Johnson, we're talking about deferring your payments. I don't like deferring your payments. Could you explain to me how that's, I think you already did, but Prop 1 funding, you're expecting, there's a process in place now.
Yes.
And you're well aware and you're watching and monitoring and you have 100% confidence that those payments are going to be made in a not timely fashion, but they're going to be made.
Close to 100%. We can't control the state, but yes.
Does that impact your workload
No.
and how you're performing?
No, we're not slowing down. This came up last year, as you recall. We had a little cash flow issue, and we said that's fine. We keep going, and we all got caught up, and so we're fine. We're fine to work. We're working with the authority the best we can. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Where are we on understanding the complete total number of pumpers who should be paying the pumping fee? Remember, there were some people we hadn't gotten a hold of yet, and so those revenues may not be where they need to be. Where are we in making that discovery?
I believe there's actually an agenda item. We'll be discussing that.
There will be an agenda, an overhead for that.
Yeah. Okay.
But I could just give you just really quick. We've pretty much completed most all of the non-de minimis collection of information between our office and the water district, coordinating our records, some of the aerial stuff that was done, the Google Map stuff, pull all that together. We continue to get more information comes in periodically. Other people are reporting, but probably 90% of that is done. The only thing that's really left to do that we had on the schedule was some field work. There was an idea that maybe some people should go out in the field and just look at the properties and see if there's anything that's still out there. That hasn't been done.
Thank you. Mr. Zadiba, I had the same question that Mr. Christensen had about paying back the county. That is included in the 80,000, or I don't see it laid out for next year. So you're saying is the 80,000 at the end of next year? I don't understand that.
It's included in the $80,000. It's included in that. By the end of 2020, will be 80,000 in the red, with paying back the county the $500,000.
After paying back the county?
Yes.
Oh, so the plan is to pay back the county in 2020. Oh.
No interest.
No interest, okay. The other concern I have is the discussions we've been having about, we're discovering how hard it is to do this general manager, and the workload is expanding dramatically from 2018 to 2019. I think we're understanding that. And if I project down the road in 2020, I'm seeing that we need to hire a general manager, because the county is not going to be prepared to take on this responsibility. And I don't see that discussion anywhere in this budget. Would you care to comment on that?
It's not in the budget, no.
Okay. Thanks. But it's something we need to look at and incorporate. My vote is going to be to hire a general manager next year, because the county's not going to be able to do it. And so those numbers are not included in that 80,000 also for 2020.
That's correct.
And understand, with those limitations in place, I want to then talk about this water marketing entry for $230,000. I think it's $230,000, yeah. $230,000 that we have in place. I appreciate the need for doing this and making this expenditure. I think it's a low probability of success, but I believe that in conversations we've had earlier, that it's something we probably need to prove me wrong at. I think that the costs of importing water are going to be staggering. I think the probability of importing water is low. I think the infrastructure design, the build out, the plan's going to take dozens of years, if at the earliest. And I understand that, and I will approve this $230,000 expenditure, but I'm approving it with the mindset that it's going to show us that through doing our upfront due diligence, we're going to discover that importing water is probably not economical for our valley. So I want to go on record as saying that. And with that, I'll listen to my other colleagues and their thoughts.
Okay. Yes, please.
Now, one thing I'd like to see if we could do is move to a 2-year budget. At this point, I'm okay with where we are today, but that'll let us have, I'd like a mid-year revisit, and a 2-year will let us know that if we are overspending in any areas of deficit, I think it'd just be more comfortable with that look going forward.
And I can agree with you there. I think that this first amount, just to get everything in place, just to get where we were, was a monumental effort. And I think that those kind of suggestions can be looked at in the future. I don't have a problem with that.
I would just add, I think the intent is for this to be a monthly report on the agenda and be updated and presented monthly.
Yeah, and at that particular point, maybe we can start massaging this a little bit more as we go forward. Yeah. And John? Any comments from my left? Nothing? John?
Do we have a plan for covering the cash flow shortfalls?
He's sitting to.
I mean, and I'm not asking just in the context of Stetson and Steve. Thank you for Stetson's willingness to work with this agency on the cash flow issues. But it looks like we've got cash flow issues for 2 years, and we have a shortfall next year as well. So, are there ongoing conversations about how we are intending to address that?
Well, I can't give a definitive answer, but I think as time goes on and we update this month, we'll get a clearer picture where we're actually at. And that will give us some indication maybe what direction we need to go in. Again, the wild card in here, the two wild cards are the pumping fee and the grant reimbursements. Those are our sources of revenue. So unless there are additional contributions by this group, I don't see any other source of revenue at this point.
Will the grant reimbursement, let's just assume it all came in today, would we still have a shortfall?
At the end of the day, based on what I've been told, after all the expenses for getting to the plan and submitting the plan and all the revenues that are anticipated to come in, there still is an $80,000 deficit.
Just on budgets.
Just on the budget.
I'm not sure what this board's appetite is for approving a clearly short budget, or maybe having a discussion about which of these expenditures we might want to, at the next meeting prioritize and deprioritize. But there's concerns on that level with regard to approving a budget that's just insufficient.
Well, yeah, I can't disagree with you there, but I think you hit a good point that I think you're going to see this board have further discussions in the very near future about income streams. Everything from additional participation fees like we had at the very beginning to what may or may not happen. I'm just not saying what could be, but it may be necessary, especially if this organization is going to carry on. Administrative costs alone are going to be something. So that is a future discussion. As far as I can't agree with looking at individual tasks and prioritizing them because most everything here is part of the plan, and that's our priority. I guess you can argue that some of these additional costs outside of the POAM aren't part of the plan. They can be looked at, but we find them necessary for the support that Stetson is providing to those particular items. And that's about all I can say for prioritizing. So I'm tending to believe very, very clearly that, yes, we have an $80,000 deficit in the year 2020, which hopefully we'll see as we massage this and make this a better budget. But that when we start having those discussions about income, where's the additional income going to come from? I don't think anybody can doubt that income needs to come from somewhere, and that the grant's going to end, and pumping fees are what they are now. Everything needs to come back for discussion again. I think we'll see it very shortly.
Has staff explored the possibility of a short-term loan from another of the member agencies?
I think we have Ty needs to make a comment to clarify this a little bit.
Introduce yourself, please, Ty.
Yeah, Ty Staley. I'm CFO for the Water District. I worked with my staff to put this budget together, and one item I need to address that hasn't been addressed yet, that $80,000 deficit we're talking about in the end of 2020 includes the payback of the county loan, but also payback of the Water District advance, which actually wouldn't take place in 2020.
Okay.
That's out in the future. So that actually gives us about $420,000 to the good at the end of 2020. That might change the conversation a little bit, but there's still, this year, there's an issue with cash flow.
Right. And I guess my last question, I'll let the rest of the board chime in if they feel like it. Assuming Stetson continues to work with this agency, are there other cash flow issues besides those invoices?
I don't think so, no. With regards to your earlier question, too, has pointed out that there is the option for this group to extend the pumping fee to cover costs. So that is an option, the current pumping fee.
I believe I asked that the staff bring forward in the near future options for additional income for the group, whether it be extending pumping fees or whatever there may be. So I don't believe they're delving into that yet, but Don's making a pretty good statement there. What options are there, and what will they recommend to this board as to make up those deficits and to continue operation of this body?
Again, this took a lot of effort just to get to this point, and I think, going forward, we'll refine it. And if there's comments that you want to make to include additional things on here, additional items or clarify items, we can certainly do that. But, this was literally pulled together just earlier this week, so.
What's the recommendation of the staff on approval?
To approve it.
Okay. Just want to be sure. If you want to work on it more, you're welcome to.
To approve it, and then going forward, we'll have an agenda item every month and update it and report on where we're at.
Okay, thank you. John, any other comments? From the rest of the board? I will go ahead and open up one more time to the public since we are in discussion, if there's anything to say. If not, then I'm going to go ahead and close public discussion.
Motion on staff's recommendation.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Good job. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, budget passes. Thank you, Don. Now, I mentioned I had a couple comments on it that I wanted to hold afterwards, and you basically said it. I think it's important that we ask all members of this board that to look back at their records and bring forward to the financial staff details of all money spent to support directly the creation of the plan. For two reasons. One is I want myself and the public to get a feel for how much money is being put in by these organizations that aren't even showing up on here. Secondly, that in the future, if there may be grants available, then we would have captured possibly some in-kind expenditures, which will help us towards further grants. So what I'm asking you, Don, is I don't know if it would be part of this budget or it might be a separate that basically shows us each of the agencies, Inyo, San Bernardino, Kern, Water District, City, and what they're in kind that they're not expecting being reimbursed for, and say this is how much money we put in this, and then correspondingly an expenditure item where that money was spent. It doesn't have to be real detailed. I just think that we need to have enough on file that if a grant came available, we could say, look at the money we spent here, all in kind, that can go towards a matching amount. And that's asking work from each of the organizations to put together those figures and numbers, but I think it's important that we have it. Okay? And with that, I promise I would address the $210,000 that the city. Now, I assume that is legal fees for the creation of the JPA and the bylaws. And does anybody know the answer to that one? What does that include?
That's a pretty good portion of what it is. It's in-kind services for the buildings on the
Okay, I see Ron coming up too.
Yes, that is reimbursement of our attorney fees as well as the use of the facility. It does not include in-kind costs for my time, our clerk's time for last year. So it primarily is just our legal fees.
Okay, so that is up to a certain point, because I see the number hasn't grown any. So when I'm asking that additional in-kind expenditures be accounted for the purpose I was just previously asking for, there might be additional legal fees and your time and staff time in there as well.
Correct. We can account for that.
As well as the use of the facility and such.
Yes.
I think it all needs to be captured. I think I myself, I would hope the board and definitely the public would like to see the amount of money, and because you can put a time factor, but the amount of money that's being spent by the organizations involved to make this happen outside of what's being financed by the grant and any money contributed by the members up here. So that's why that's important. And so basically the $210,000 is going to stand there. And Scott, I'm going to ask you this. That is definitely, your guys are considering that a reimbursable expense, correct? At this point?
Correct.
Any hope in the future you can change the mind here?
Expect that to be paid.
Thought I'd ask. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir, Mr. Gleason.
Since you opened this dialogue up about 2020 and expenses outside of the motion, I was curious as to, we had some statement made during the conversation of pumping fees. and when they were going to end? And when are the pumping fees going to end? Do we have an answer to that question?
Well, there was a fixed amount to collect, and I think there was a time limit on it. I don't remember what it was. Was it 18 months?
I don't know off the top of my head if it was 18 or 24 months.
I believe they were scheduled to end April of 2020, with the thought that if we had additional costs, that the pumping fee could be collected further on to pay those bills. With the city, the water district, and the county being the last to receive reimbursement, with the priority being Stetson and the other vendors to make sure that they were paid first, and then the last three entities would be reimbursed last.
Ron's about 99% accurate. We were going to get reimbursed on the backside of that because obviously we've given you a loan. We need to pay Steve Johnson, et cetera. There was no set time frame of when the fees would end. We had assumed, I don't remember if it was April or June, but we had put a time period in because we did know after we got the GSP done, assuming we make it on time at our January 31st deadline, you still had to get it up through DWR. So that was what was calculated in the fee structure. I'm kind of my question I have that's posed to me in my head is this $80,000. Is that after you've run the fee as to what we had projected in the fee and stopping, or are you going to extend the fee? Because nothing said the fee had to end in April or June if we needed more to cover cost overruns.
Ty can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that the fee was going to end. That's the assumption that was made.
There is no definitive fee setting date. The fee would keep going if we had cost overruns.
I just want to get him working on these things. Yeah. Yes, as I understand it, the 80,000, the fees ended at 1,522, whatever this number is here, as the projected fees. No extension of them. Okay. Does that answer your question, Phil?
Actually, it does. The fee.
There's no extension of the fees in this budget.
If your budget is saying we're only collecting what we projected, and we are now $80,000 over what we have projected after you've included the modest reserve we put in there, your $80,000 would be picked up by just extending the fee out one more month.
And I think the intention is that as we have further financial monthly, we're discussing this financially, that will come forward.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments from the board before I move on? All right. So the next item is the discussion.
Well, you have a motion and a second to approve the revised budget. I don't think you did a vote.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, it was ayes.
Voted,
Yeah.
approved.
You sleeping over there?
No.
Okay. Okay, discussion approval of transitioning partial financial responsibilities to Indian Wells Valley Water District for 2019. Don, you had a letter in here?
Right. There's a letter in the packet to authorize Indian Wells Valley Water District personnel to sign the checks, to authorize the checks. Just for history, the county was the first agency that was the lead agency for this group. The lead transferred to the city last year. The city was not in a position to assume the financial duties, so the county continued to do that. We have taken that on this year, and we just need authorization to be able to process the payments. What we're looking at doing is having the district receive the invoices, sign off, check and sign off on the invoices. We still sweep the money from the mission bank account that we collect. The fees are collected, deposited in the mission bank account, and then when necessary, we sweep that over to the county for payment. But the district would be receiving the invoices, signing off on the invoices, authorizing payment of those checks.
Okay. And it's the cleanest way.
What we're asking for is authorization for the district personnel to perform those duties.
And the reason it remains like that is mostly for audit purposes. The county has the money, they have the funds. I think the grant money is going out of direction as well. So it keeps everything clean for audits, correct?
Right.
Okay.
And the concern I have is, as I stated in the email, I'll just read it. I sent an email earlier on March 14th. For the remainder of this fiscal year, the Water District staff, as part of being the lead agency, will work directly with the county departments that hold the funds and make the payments. But I do recommend that the board discuss and consider how financial duties will be handled in fiscal year 2020 when the leadership of the Groundwater Authority transfers back to the county per Section 3.2 of the bylaws. I believe the board would be better served if financial duties are not handed off on an annual basis, and recommend the board determine where these duties should reside permanently and suggest this be an agenda item on the next board meeting. So again, I'm not advocating that we switch it back to the county, but I think once you get something up and running and it's efficient, transferring it back and forth is not the way to go.
So you're going to put that on next month's agenda for discussion?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we have before us the letter requesting they change the signers on Fund 42927. Do I have any other comments from the board about that? I don't know if the public has any comments, but I'll open it anyway. Hearing none from the public, I'll back to the board. Oh, I'm sorry. Judy?
Judy Decker. I think having the Indian Wells Valley Water District handle this is an excellent idea, and I think they should be thanked for taking on this additional duty.
Thank you, Judy. All right. Any more for the public? I'll close that and open up back to the board.
Thanks, Ron, for taking on this duty, just to follow up with Judy. And I agree with Supervisor Gleason's earlier comment that consistency among staffing probably should be prioritized by this agency moving forward in terms of our longer-term planning. So I would, unless there's other comments, make a motion to approve this request.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Looking for a second?
Second.
Thank you. And so I'll ask for a vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. All right. All right. Water Resource Manager report. This is all yours, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Finally to the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
The real good stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. It's good to see everybody again. It's actually a beautiful day up here. It was a great drive. It's nice to see all of our friends again. We've got about 5 items. I'm going to do one. I think Jeff's going to do. Oh, actually, Jeff's going to do the first one. I'm going to do a couple, and then Jeff's going to finish up. So Jeff's going to do the poem first. I just wanted to make one general comment first, and I've got to be careful about not getting into closed session because I've got a bad reputation of going out of closed session. I'm not going to do that and saying things out of closed session. But I think it's important for you folks out there to know these attorneys' allocation meetings. Jim's gone now. Jim, I think Jim left. He was here this morning. These attorneys' allocation meetings, I actually asked to see if I could sit in on those in the beginning. And as it turns out, I think it's been really, really, really important that we be there, that we are sitting in there giving the technical input with the attorneys and the allocation folks. So we're doing that. I think they're making some progress. I've mentioned before, so I want everybody to know, and the board, but everybody to know, I've mentioned before that trying to work on the technical stuff with our technical people that are working on the technical approach to this, and then trying to marry that with the allocation discussion going with the attorneys and the legal stuff has been a challenge, and they slowly were coming together, but we've still been apart. I think we've made some real progress in the last week or two, and I'm thinking that by the next TAC meeting, we may be able to give a report of how pulling them together, and we may have the makings. We may have the makings of at least a start point on a real implementation plan in the next 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. So I want to let people know that it's been tough because the allocation folks are talking one way and the technical stuff we're doing on the modeling is different, and we really are trying to pull that together. And one of the comments you're going to hear from Jeff is we have to pull this together because the poem tells us that this has got to be pulled together like right now. And so we're working on that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff to do the poem update.
He almost stole all my thunder. Good morning. There we are. This is the overview of the schedule of the poem. And I always like to point out where we're at. The POAM ends has us submitting the GSP, the plan, at the end of this year, and we are fast approaching the end of this year. We got 9 months and a couple weeks left. And a lot of work to do, as was mentioned earlier. I'm going to go to the issue that Steve talked about. Our modeling work is on a pause right now, and that's what's on the critical path, is to complete our modeling work. The POAM calls for us to have all the modeling done and to have the TAC and the PAC make recommendations on what are the management actions that we should implement at their April meeting. We are not going to make that where we stand now. And I'll talk about what we're going to do to try and get those items addressed. We have our POAM ending at the end of the year with submittal of the plan. The plans are due by the end of January of next year. There's a month buffer in there. Last month I came up, and the point that I made was along the lines of what Steve was saying. We've got our modeling deadline that was set. We're supposed to start writing the chapters on what are the management actions that are going to be implemented in April. What we need is more interaction between the allocation group, the PAC and the TAC, and the board. And those things have started. We took some of the feedback from the allocation group from their last meeting and put it out. Put some proposals out on some additional work we could do. There wasn't consensus on that. There's an allocation group meeting coming up next Friday, next week. We're going to put something out ahead of that meeting to try and generate discussion, to try and get a direction to go for our next modeling run so that we can continue the development of this. So hopefully by the end of the day next Friday, we've got a direction and we're engaged again and we're moving forward again. I would anticipate, as we've done with the modeling ad hoc committee, they've been very generous to be available to talk about what we might do next, look at proposed model runs, look at results on an as-needed basis, and that's been extremely helpful. I think we may need to do more of those type of things with different groups that we have. That's where we're at on the POAM. And because the critical path after this, after the modeling and coming up with what the management action plans are, the critical path items are writing the chapters and review of the chapters. So we've got a month buffer before we start to impacting those items in our POAM and our development of our plan. So that's all I wanted to say about the POAM today.
What do you need from the board to move that ahead? Is there anything we can do, or are we doing in terms of the model?
I would anticipate that Mr. Markman may need to confer with the board about what he gets from the allocation group. I think what we need is make sure that he's tracking, the board's aware of what's happening, and see if he needs any direction. That's what I see as a key feedback at this point.
Thank you.
Question on the modeling. So we've run two models, if I understand correctly from listening to the PAC meeting. Is the PAC currently or the TAC currently directed to run additional models? And if so, what are the basic premises of those models?
The budget has 2 more modeling runs in it. At the moment, we don't have a modeling run selected to run, and that's because there's not consensus around, and it's not just the PAC or the TAC. There's not consensus about how the allocations are going to work, because we need to run that back through how then would pumping work, reductions in pumping. So at the moment, we don't have finality on what those last 2 model runs would be, and that's what I hope to get from the allocation group to run back through the TAC, so we've got a modeling run to run.
Have we run, in staff's estimation, a model that would encompass what I understand to be the worst case scenario, where we don't have an agreement and we don't have imported water?
Well, the runs we have done, the first run we did is what we're calling the baseline run. That was what would everybody do if we didn't have a GSP, there was no imported water, there were no restrictions on pumping. What do people anticipate they would do? So we have done that modeling run, and it shows a sharp decline in all water levels over the modeling period from 2020 to 2070. It took another 1.5 million acre feet of water out of the basin. So we have looked at that.
And how does that modeling scenario that we have, or that data that we have, relate to the presentations given to the TAC and the PAC this last month regarding shallow well impacts?
We have done an analysis of shallow well impacts for certain periods of that. I'm sorry, I've forgotten what we presented. I presented it, helped present it to the PAC last month, and I can't remember what we presented on the baseline. We have presented in the past an analysis of the worst case that wasn't based on the model. Before we had our model runs, we did an analytical method and projected what shallow well impacts would be.
If I understand what happened at the TAC and the PAC correctly, and please someone correct me if I'm wrong, we presented the shallow well impacts with the first two modeling runs, which included imported water in 2030.
That is correct. The first two modeling runs both included, in some form or other, imported water in 2030, and we did show shallow well impacts on that, a preliminary analysis of that.
Is there a plan to complete that analysis, which is preliminary, to take into account, what I'm phrasing the worst case scenario, as it relates to shallow well impacts?
Yes. Yeah, both the preliminary analysis we did on shallow impacts for modeling scenarios 1 and 2 is being completed, and then we'll do it for the baseline too.
When do we expect that to be done?
Those will probably be presented at the TAC in 2 weeks.
Okay.
I think they should be ready by then.
Thank you.
And just a clarification, John, to help with that. Model run number 1, okay, included ramp down to a sustainably safe yield after 20 years, and it included imported water, but it included imported water at an off-site location, so it was a storage and recovery and then piped into the basin. So the impacts to pumping in the basin would be effectively no imported water. The imported water brought into the basin would have a minor effect in that some of the pumping wouldn't get because they're pumping the water. Because they're getting the water direct, they wouldn't pump quite as much. But essentially, the pumping gets down to that level and addresses pumping with no imported water, at least replenishing in the basin. And then the baseline model assumes nothing happens between now and 70 years, and everybody just continues to pumping what they want to pump, and the shallow well impacts have been evaluated for that, and that's what we're going to present.
Okay. So yeah, I defer to the board's overall thoughts here, but when it comes to interaction between this board, the PAC, the TAC, and those allocation meetings, it seems to Inyo important that we have our own understanding of what the baseline truly is as it relates to the impacts that this community will see, both with no action, and baseline is no import period, because in our estimation, import's not guaranteed and may not be likely. So if, my vote today, if we were going to be able to give direction, if this board chose to do so, would be to run models that do these ramp down scenarios with no import and see how that affects the first in line to be affected, the shallow well domestic users in this basin. That's what I would suggest. I'll leave it to this board to make a decision on that if you want.
Director Gleason?
Thank you. My understanding, Mr. Stetson, is in essence, accomplished that feat by importing water and relocating it outside the basin or in a separate, discrete place, and we still looked at the impacts on shallower wells. Is that correct?
I understand that, but my concern is that it's not correct because we are actually building into the modeling extra water that doesn't exist today. And because that water is still imported, is still used, and therefore affects what the other existing groundwater levels would be.
Is that a true statement?
Well, in effect, it's not exactly correct, because what we do is the pumping is reduced down to sustainable yield. What we do is bring the imported water into the basin to allow additional uses. So total uses in the basin don't go down to sustainable yield, but the additional uses come from the imported water. The pumping is the same. So impacts are addressed as if imported water wasn't there to the basin.
So the reason I'm asking that question, because I agree with you, I want to know those impacts, those real impacts, and I'm hopeful that you're satisfied and I'm satisfied that the way we're doing it is giving us that data, that ability to look at real impacts to shallower wells, because we're taking that imported water and moving it someplace else.
Well, again, I just think that premise is wrong, because if we, again, I understand the pumping's lower, so the shallow wells shouldn't be impacted, but that's assuming additional water's coming in from somewhere else. And so we don't have to impact those shallow wells. But if we literally take imported water out of the equation to get what I'm deeming the worst case scenario, what's the timeline for significant impacts to occur to users of water in this basin? And have we modeled for that? And what I'm hearing is no.
We actually did exactly that for the baseline model. There was no imported water in the baseline model.
Was there a ramp down, though, built into any of that?
No.
So that's, I guess,
That's a worst case scenario that you're talking about.
Right. So thank you for making that clarification for everyone. I wasn't articulating it well enough. My suggestion would be to model the policy directions that we're hoping to go without imported water included in the model. And that way we could see if, we're obviously marching down a path of, ramp downs, cliff, other things we've been discussing. Do those scenarios make sense if we're not able to make or to import water in the future? That's my question. I don't think we can answer that if all of our models have imported water included in the equation.
Mr. Chairman, if I could go up my questions, I think we're going to dovetail nicely into what John is
Great.
posing.
Are you done? Okay. Yes, sir.
Okay. Jeff, item number 82, imported water study. It shows an allocation of 175. We spent 121,000, and we're 100% complete. And then if I go, and then under the subheaders are evaluate potential imported water supply sources, that we spend some money on there, and we did some other tasks under that particular item. Could you distinguish for me the difference between the money we've spent on that imported water study and what the proposal we're looking at for the water marketing? So I want to be in my mind and the public to understand the difference between these dollars and these tasks and what we're hoping to spend those dollars and those tasks on. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yep. The money that's in the poem for the tasks that you're referring to were for a review of any of the studies that had been done on imported water being brought into the basin before, a relook at what opportunities might be out there, running through setting up conceptually what is an imported water project, what would it look like, what would be the components of bringing imported water here, and then trying to put together some feasibility conceptual level costs for that, so that as we're discussing management options, we have some idea of where imported water might be obtained, how it might come into the basin, and what the costs would be at that conceptual level as we're putting the plan together. With the water marketing, whereas we did a conceptual look at what have the cost of some water transactions been, we made the assumption we would be able to get the water that we need, the water rights that we need in our look at a project. The water marketer is going to go out and actually look at the market and talk to people and see where the water is and see what the actual costs are today, not the historical transactions we have seen. Sorry.
No, keep going.
Okay. Look at those. Talk to some of the entities. We had identified that we might potentially be able to bring water through Antelope Valley East Kern Water District. They're one of the nearest state water contractors, the nearest state water contractor. I talked with them about opportunities. We had identified, of course, that the LA Department of Water and Power Aqueduct is here, and had a very preliminary technical discussion with them. If this board chooses to go that way and it's identified that's something we want to pursue, they've dealt with that agency before, and they would carry on to actually start implementing or start bringing the current market and opportunities to the board to consider.
So when you reported out on your item number 83, evaluate potential imported water supply sources, what was your evaluation? Do you remember off the top of your head? Is it feasible? Is the water there? Is it something we can achieve? Is it politically viable? Is it cost efficient? I mean, what did we discover out of spending $153,000 on that?
We did discover that there are physical facilities within reach. We've talked to the agency. Antelope Valley East Kern Water Agency was very willing to be a partner and have discussions with us. We've identified what the cost is. We have not made a determination because that's part of the whole plan and the allocation and how the plan is set up about how it gets paid for and is it economic or not. It is expensive. We've identified that, and we've done that so that these other discussions can continue.
Thanks, Jeff. Could you tell me when you said you made a determination? I think what you just said. You said something about you made a determination on the costs.
Yes.
How much?
Ballpark costs. We have two different projects, and I'm going to, in a later presentation today, I'm going to show a slightly variation on this, but I'll explain why. We looked at bringing 15,000 acre-feet of water in. When we started this study, the modeling and the TAC hadn't gone through a lot of discussion, so it's looking nowadays like we might not need that much water, but that's what we looked at. For bringing water in through LA Department of Water and Power through an exchange, we're looking at something like $2,000 an acre foot for the water, including amortizing the capital, the variable costs, and then for bringing water in through the Antelope Valley East Kern Water Agency, we were looking at something like $3,000 an acre foot.
So we stopped looking immediately, right?
Well,
so let's do the math on that. Just real quick. I know it's not real, but it's just something you looked at. $2,000 an acre foot, 15,000 acre feet. That's what, $30 million for the water, just for the water.
No, that includes building the infrastructure too. That's not just. But that's total cost of the water.
I just want everybody to understand the costs. Thank you very much.
It is expensive. Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. The comment I want to make is I keep hearing that we hope that we don't need to import any water. We really don't want to. But when I look at the numbers here, if you were to make the assumption of numbers that you have, I'm looking at the estimated baseline pumping charts where you guys projected everything from 2020, 2040, 2070. If you take the newest scenario, say 2020, and you back out let's just assume all the farming ramps down to zero at some given time, okay? And you just add up the needs of the water district, the base, the mutuals that are out there, the city of Indian Kern, the domestic well owners, the de minimis users, and Cerro Valley Minerals and the Navy, you still end up importing water. I mean, the hope of getting down to never importing water, I think, I want to go on record saying I don't believe that's possible. The numbers haven't shown it to me yet. And so I think it needs to be in the discussion. Is it 15,000 acre feet? I don't believe that's the number. I think that if we work towards where we're headed, it's more in the neighborhood of 3,000 to 5,000 acre feet. And so, and yes, it may be expensive. I don't deny that. But I think of taking that off the table at any given point until we realize we can survive within our recharge is a mistake. So any scenario you run that takes that takes the potential of the recharge to maintain the basic requirements of this community and its need to support the base is in my opinion, a wrong move. I just want to state that.
And just one more thing on that. Well, two things. One, the numbers are the numbers, and we don't maintain the numbers without import. That's true. And I think that is the purpose of this agency here, to decide what is our sustainability criteria. Ultimately, that's going to be up to this agency to decide. And if that sustainability criteria requires, in this agency's mind, maintaining the status quo with projected growth, import has to happen. I agree, because the numbers don't add up otherwise. But if that sustainability criteria can't be met if that was the case, because, and we're still waiting, I think, to hear from the PAC, what can the local agencies, the local users absorb in terms of cost? I think that was an express section in the minutes from the January minutes that Steve had mentioned, or Steve had asked and said, you don't need to put your cards on the table yet. Well, I think we're getting to the point where people need to put their cards on the table. What can we absorb in terms of cost? Because if users in this basin can't absorb the cost, then we have to look at different scenarios, such as a worst case scenario. That's why my request and suggestion today is that we model for a ramp down worst case scenario of no imported water, so that we understand what the worst case scenario truly looks like and can make decisions, hopefully building off of that in a way that we're able to absorb the cost. But what if we're not? And if we're not planning for that now, then we're just setting ourselves up for failure, because our deadline is in December.
I believe that it's a necessity that we look at the community. I don't believe that this board can say to the community, don't grow to support the base. I don't believe we can, or would I want to. I think the community needs to consider, we're always talking modest growth. I think if you look at the history of the city, I've been here for 30 years, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 to 3% or something like that. And also it's tied to the requirement for the personnel on the base. If for any reason that begins to grow, that affects the growth of the city. So we need to be prepared to sustain that. Is it a massive amount? I don't know. But to sit and think that a doomsday scenario of no more building permits, no more city growth, cutting off water, whatever it may be to stay within the sustainability requirements, I think is not the direction that I, as a member of this board, want to go. I think we need to explore all these factors and with those things in mind that I just mentioned and move ahead from there. Looking at a doomsday scenario, I think sends the wrong message. Thank you. Is that done with you, Jeff?
Yep. That's it.
Okay.
For now.
Jeff, do you have the clicker?
Are you going to ask the public? You can do this one at a
well,
time.
I was going to wait. I don't know if I was going to ask that question based on the number of things we're covering here. I guess I'll go ahead and open it for public comment on each of the items then, because there are, 5 items here? Yeah. Steve, you agree with that? Would that be the best way for you?
That's
okay.
Fine. Sure.
What's that?
Judy Decker. We have been in overdraft for over 50 years. That's a long time. During that time, the valley has grown in population, and it has grown in water consumption with large agriculture and small agriculture. You can't fool nature. You can think you're going to, but in the end you don't. There is a finite supply of water under the surface of this valley. Most of it is very brackish. Where is the water going to come from in the future if you do not import it? Mr. Tatum comes from Apple Valley. I remember when Apple Valley, Victorville, Hesperia were little tiny towns. They have grown enormously. One of the reasons they have grown is they have imported water. I look at Lancaster and Palmdale. They used to be little tiny towns too. They also have grown because of imported water. Everything that's alive needs water. We have to have water to survive here. We have to have water to grow. We need to get imported water. You can't just snap your fingers and have it appear. And I would tell you that already there are people hauling water who live along the North Brown Road area. You can observe them every weekend.
Wes Katzenstein. I'd like to put just a little bit of a different spin on this. A lot of my friends and folks I talk with, we argue about it's impossible to import water and it's impossible to survive without importing water. And we've heard both arguments presented here in the last few minutes. It's my understanding that SGMA says you cannot plan on imported water until you know the source of that water and how much water you're going to have in hand. And I suppose we should say if it's affordable as well. So if we put in a plan that assumes we're going to be successful at importing water, that plan might be rejected. I'm 100% behind the idea we need to put our highest efforts into trying to find imported water. That's what's happening now. I think that's the right thing to do. I think our plan is our planning effort. We should not count that water until we have it in hand. And that might say that our plan should show us approaching trying to live with the water we have, or at least draw it down as slow as possible while we find that imported water. So I will not argue we need to find imported water. I will not argue our lifestyle requires it. But don't put it in the plan. The plan should probably be based on that worst case scenario and show in the plan changing if and when we find that imported water. So that is, I think, might be the approach we need to take. And that's why, in my mind, it may be important to run that scenario. How would we live? How much of our groundwater would we have to deplete to live within our available resources while we're seeking that imported water? That's what I think your best way forward is. Thank you.
Sophia Merck, I agree. I think we do have to plan the worst case scenario. And only then can we look forward to working with importing water. Importing water will be necessary, but we have to build a plan that truly gives us the baseline. Thank you.
Ralph Lockenmeyer. I've got a couple of comments. First of all, the fact that Judy Decker gave her speech for growing the city. I'll tell you, there's one resident that doesn't want it to grow. I'm here because it's small, and that's the way I want to keep it. So I just want to show there's people on the other side of that. Second thing is, I'm familiar with Mr. Panzer's research on constitutional rights to reasonableness of groundwater consumption, the fact that farming in the middle of the desert, when you're going to thirst out the residents, may not be a reasonable assumption. The reasonableness clause is in the Constitution. I'm also aware of his talk about the right to humanity to water. My point is, are you going to mention any of this in your plan? To me, that may not be your plan, but you really ought to mention that there is the possibility that lawsuits could be executed that may bring you all the farmers' water at no extra cost. I would like to see that in there as a citizen. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's okay. No.
First of all, thanks for having these forums and allowing us to come forward with concerns and hear all the issues as you see them. I'm interested that one element that I'm sure you've thought about, but I don't hear any mention of, is reuse. You know, we have a one-use water
Could you please state your name, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mallory Boyd.
Thank you.
We have a one-use water philosophy right now. You know, agriculture, I guess, is one way that we just get rid of it without a thorough use of human consumption, but we don't do anything about trying to recover, other than perhaps the golf course on base. I know they do some treatment of water over there. I'd like to hear that discussed in the future. Maybe it'll come out of the TAC and PAC reports.
I'll just jump in and let you know that that has been discussed, and there are numerous PowerPoints discussing actual academic, at least conceptual costs for that. So those conversations are ongoing. I think that was part of this board's request for an augmentation plan to be put together where it's all concisely condensed into a document we can digest relatively easily instead of the foot stack of paperwork from the PAC and the TAC meetings. But those conversations are ongoing.
Awesome. Is it too early to know if the costs are comparable to importing water?
We're in the academic, conceptual phase of costing these things out, but those numbers are in those PowerPoint presentations.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nick Panzer, Ridgecrest resident. I want to second Mr. Katzenstein's ideas that importing should not be included in any model or any plan until those contracts are in hand. Sigma regulations are clear, as Mr. Katzenstein pointed out, that we cannot include imported water until we have a reliable source. And the reason that provision is there is to prevent GAs from using imports as a justification to go on mining. And that's my concern, and that would be my reason that we not include imports in modeling until we have them in hand. It just makes it too easy to go right on massively mining. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing other comments for the public, Steve, move on.
Moving on. Okay, we'll move on. Jeff, can you pull the other one up? The next one up. This one is actually Prop 1 status and schedule. You can kind of look up there. It's dated today, but some of this stuff's a little bit old, even what I've already discussed today. Talks about getting the package submitted and initial comments back, and the second round of comments that we got in February. Latest, which I've got right here on my phone, just this week. On Tuesday of this week, this is so you've got the latest information, which I kind of discussed before, but this is a little more detail. Earlier this week on Tuesday, we did receive confirmation from Jennifer Wong at DWR on the last and final clarification comments that they have for us on the invoice that we submitted. So we've got that information. Our goal is to get that invoice turned around back to them, addressing their comments by no later than the end of next week. Jennifer has indicated, this is our contact at DWR, has indicated that she's going to take a week to 2 weeks to make sure it's all done. Then she submits it for internal review. Her estimate of internal review is 45 days after she approves it. So right now we are looking at probably towards the middle to the end of May to get our first check back from DWR on reimbursement cost. And to tie this back to some of the financial stuff that was done on cash flow, some of the earlier estimates were probably June we would get our first payment. So right now we're looking maybe a little bit ahead if everything goes right. And right now our relationship with Jennifer and DWR is very good, the communication. I've mentioned this before, but very seriously, they've got some hurdles to get across on their format and what they're doing, because they're having to do things 2 and 3 times when they put out formats that they want things submitted in, whether it's invoicing or progress reports. Hopefully they've got it squared away. We're on the same track with them. And then the next round, which is, we do this quarterly, we'll submit quarterly. On the next round, it'll be a little more straightforward and go a little faster. That's the goal. So that's the update for Prop 1 status. And I'll go ahead and do the next one, so if you have any questions on either one. The next one is Jeff's got it, is the pump fee status. Here's the information. We try to provide this every month when we come. 49 registered accounts, 19 accounts not registered, believed to be non-de minimis based on criteria. So we're still working on those. Legal counsel is doing some things on those. We're kind of out of that loop right now. Stetson, as far as identification, we've got them on board. We've got them identified, so the work's being done to bring them in. Forms were sent out, letters are being sent out. As I mentioned before, we worked with the Water District on aerial photographs to try to identify other parcels out there that might be non-de minimis pumpers that they may have been missed or they haven't registered. Water District and our office correlated those aerial photographs with all the records that we have on people that are registered to try and cross-reference those. Those would identify some of the 19 accounts that aren't registered that there's follow-up on. Right now, we're pretty much on a pause. We're not working on identifying any more non-de minimis. Work is being done with legal counsel to bring the ones we know about in. The only other thing that's been talked about, and we haven't started on it yet, Don and I have talked about it, get the board authorization if we're going to do that. One of the discussions was to actually put some personnel in the field with the maps, with all the registrations, all of the registered accounts and unregistered accounts, to go out in the field with a checklist and try to document anything else that's out there actually in the field. And we were going to work with Don's office to help put together the checklist. I think it's going to be Don's staff, not our staff, but probably local staff that would go out and do this field verification of any additional de minimis accounts. Or non-de minimis accounts. So that's where we're at. Total payments received to date, $211,000. I think that's about right. This is from Heather. I think our office, Heather's working closely with Lauren. I think that's pretty close, but that's what's been received so far in the pump fee status.
I have one quick question. Registration form sent to newly identified non-de minimis users. Is there a number on those, or is that part of that count above?
53.
Yeah, it's 53 non-de minimis.
Yeah.
Okay, so we basically have 49 registered, 19 accounts not registered, and 53 potential registered.
Newly, yeah.
Newly,
Right.
okay. That'd be nice to see that number on
Yeah.
there.
I think we're getting close
Okay.
to being complete.
Thank you.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Do you want to go ahead and open up for public comment again? Or you want to
Sure.
move on to?
For now, both items. If you have comments on either one of the last two,
Okay.
it'll be fine,
All right.
because Jeff's going to do the next one.
All right. Open for public comment on the last two.
Sophia Merck. I was at a meeting on Saturday. Ron Strand was there, and so was Supervisor Gleason. But there was a service organization in this town that said that they have been receiving these notices. However, they don't have a well. So it was reported to Ron Strand, and I believe there might be some other ones out there also.
Yeah.
Thank
Are you referring to the Elks?
Pardon me?
Are you referring to the Elks?
Yes.
That's been
I wasn't going to say their name.
That's been addressed.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other public comment? Okay, hearing none. Anything from the board about those couple items before I move on?
Sure.
All right, let's move on to the last two, summary and the severely disadvantaged.
Okay, Jeff's going to provide a little summary on the water supply augmentation plan. Understand the water supply augmentation plan really is encompassed in our model runs, the TAC meetings, and where we're getting our water. We've done a recycled water tech memo, and we're working on an alternative water conservation tech memo, imported water and water conservation tech memo. While the text of those memos haven't been released for everybody to review the actual written part of that, the PowerPoints have been presented at the TAC to show where we're at on this stuff. So I think Jeff's going to give an overview of that right now.
Yeah, we were asked to bring a water augmentation plan discussion to the board, and let me say this is not the recommended or a recommended plan. There isn't consensus about what should the water augmentation plan be at this point. But since we were asked to bring something, I brought the assumptions that were in the second management modeling run that we've done as an example of the concepts that have been discussed. We discussed earlier the two imported water concepts that have been studied. They're both included in this modeling scenario. So this is a presentation of what a augmentation plan could look like. As I mentioned, it's an overview of management modeling scenario number 2. It includes the two imported water concepts that I described earlier. I'm going to briefly run through just what the elements are in developing an imported water supply that we used that we came up with in our study, and a rough cost per acre foot, which are a little bit different than what I presented before, but that's because the concepts are a little bit different. So, in modeling scenario number 2, we assumed that pumping in 2020 was about 30,000 acre feet. We assumed that there would be a step down in pumping in 2025. So 5 years after our plan would start, we'd have a step down in pumping. And large and small ag would step down by 40%. Kern County would reduce by 30%. The water district, Inyo Kern Community Service District, and the mutuals would reduce by 10%. And that's based on input from our ad hoc modeling committee so we could look at how the basin reacted to step downs in pumping before we would get imported water. We assumed there was no change in the Navy or in de minimis pumping, and that in 2030, the Water District and Searles would stop pumping because imported water would be coming in from Antelope Valley East Kern Water Agency, and that it would be treated imported water, so we would connect it directly to their systems and supply them so that they wouldn't need to pump. And so the TAC had wanted us to make sure we kept both imported water projects in play. So this is how we got the direct use of imported water into our modeling scenario. And the result of all that is we got the pumping down to 13,646. And I'll come back to that number in a minute. And this is just a graphical representation of those step downs. We start over on the left at almost 30,000 acre feet. In 5 years, we step down by the percentages I mentioned. And then another 5 years, we step down when imported water is provided directly to the Water District and Searles, and they're able to reduce their pumping. So the water supply, the basin gets about 7,650 acre feet a year of natural recharge. This concept assumed that there would be recycled water available from the city's wastewater treatment plant that would undergo further use, and some of that would be used for landscape irrigation. There was recycled water in excess of landscape irrigation that we could find. We've assumed that would be injected into the basin, so it would add to the supply of the groundwater that's available. And in this concept, we also assumed that we would get water from the LA aqueduct through an exchange, and that would be then put into surface water ponds in the main part of the basin. That is, the location we modeled was over west of the airport, the Inyo Kern Airport. And to make water balances work, we were assuming about 5,644 acre feet a year were recharged there. The reason to do that is see how the basin would react to the recharge of water into the basin at that location. The recycled water that became available in 2025, as I mentioned, would go to all the landscape irrigation uses, and then imported water would come in for the city, directly into the city and Searles in 2030. So, I mean, that's the overview of what a water supply plan could look like. You know, it was mentioned earlier, you know, were we looking at recycled water? And I'm sorry I didn't bring the details about exactly where all the landscape irrigation would be and how much that is, but that is in some of our other presentations. But these are the elements of water supply augmentation plan could look like. There are other concepts out there that aren't included here, things like the brackish water study. You know, some other things have been suggested, but these are just the concepts that we explored in this particular modeling scenario. And when you look at those things graphically, the top line with the dots in it is the pumping that starts, and then you see the drop in it again. And then we've actually got two dotted lines. There's an upper dotted line starting in 2025 and a lower dotted line. The lower dotted line is the pumping, and the top dotted line from 2025 out to 2070 is the total water supply. And it's built up from starting with the 7650 of natural replenishment shown in the darker blue there, and then the green box on top of that is the imported water that is replenished into the basin. So that gets the combination of the natural replenishment and the imported water that's replenishment gets up to that bottom dashed line, which is the pumping. So we are pumping at the safe yield of the basin at that point. But to meet additional demands, the concept includes that light blue box and the darker, really dark blue or purple box up there. Then the light blue is imported water that goes directly to the Water District and to Searles, and the top line is the imported water that's injected into the basin. So that's graphically what a plan could look like. And the elements that go into the imported water we mentioned briefly. You need to go out and get water rights. You need to and pay for them, and you need to build facilities. Depending on which project it is, it's a pipeline and pump stations. If we're bringing it from Antelope Valley East Kern Water Agency, if we're taking water out of the aqueduct, in this concept, we need to have a turnout in the aqueduct. We need to have a pipeline to take it down to an area west of the Inyo Kern Airport. We need to build some facilities, some big ponds that we could put it in and let it percolate. And then we've also looked at what the operation and maintenance costs would be, what the annual cost. In this concept, we were assuming we would get state water project entitlement on the market, but there are annual transportation fees that we would need and potentially wheeling fees. We included all those things in the conceptual costs we came up with. And in this scenario, I'd mention costs of $2,000 and $3,000 an acre foot. $2,000 for the LA Department of Water and Power project and $3,000 per acre foot for the AVAC. That was based on 15,000 acre feet a year. We're now looking at smaller quantities, and we did not go back and readjust all of our capital facilities. So this is not a completely accurate number. I just wanted to give you a sense of how the smaller quantities affect the costs. What was the $2,000 an acre foot for LA aqueduct water, because of the smaller quantity, we're spreading it over now the 5,644 instead of 15,000 acre feet. It goes from $2,000 an acre foot to $3,000 an acre foot, and the direct use project from AVEC went from 3,000 to 4,000 because of the smaller quantities we're bringing in. So,
did you include the recycled water numbers that you're looking at here in the models as well?
We included the quantity that was being injected into the basin, because that's what the model reacts to.
The existing or the per conceptual?
The proposed conceptual injection of recycled water in the basin.
Because my understanding is there is probably even higher cost per acre foot for that recycled water.
Oh, yeah, we've looked at two components to the recycled water. One is a direct use for irrigation. That number is lower than these numbers, the cost of that water. But you're right, to inject it into the ground, for practical reasons and regulatory reasons, it needs to go through advanced treatment. So that number is, is a higher number. It's probably lower than the $3,000 an acre foot, but it would be higher than, I think, than the bigger concept with $15,000 an acre foot that we had looked at before. You may have looked at our number more recently. Maybe you remember what it is.
Well, I think it depends on which recycling project we're talking about.
Okay.
It does appear to vary depending on which source of effluent we're talking about recycling. Has the TAC or the PAC made any inquiry into what these costs will translate with regard to fees?
I think the question is out there. We haven't gotten into the concepts, and I think we're getting there, about how they're allocated. There are different ways to do them. You can have a gross pump tax, that is that everybody in the basin has to pay a pumping assessment on every acre foot, or you can have the difference between the allocated natural yield and any overpumping that's done during a ramp down. I think we're just getting to the point to put some numbers together on those things for people to consider.
We should probably discuss this with the PAC and the TAC reports coming up later today.
Is that it, Jeff, on the augmentation plan?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, you want to go ahead and, you're covering the severely disadvantaged update as well, are you not?
Yes.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and do that, and I'll open for public.
Okay. Yeah, we were asked for an update on the status of the SDAC projects, and this is severely disadvantaged community projects. The Prop 1 grant included grant money for 2 projects for severely disadvantaged communities. And those grant funds are, 100% grant funded. There was no match needed there. One of the projects is a water conservation and rebate program, and the other one is a water audit, leak detection, and leak repair program. And one of the reasons they were put into the grant application is so we could look at how much savings, as sort of pilot programs, to see how much savings do we think we could get through these programs. I mean, the assumption is if we find they're beneficial, they're things we would want to continue in the future. And we wanted to put them into the grant program so we could see that what those results were, to see if they were going to play a prominent role in the management of the basin to get to sustainability. So the conservation and grant rebate program, water conservation and rebate program, was originally going to offer rebates to retail customers and commercial customers for different water-saving devices that they might purchase, which are listed here, and that was, and then encourage any base conservation we could. And the audit and detection program is we'd pick, and the concept was it would be in Kern Community Services District to do a water audit to see how much their water losses were. There would be a leak detection survey, and if leaks were found, there would be money in the grant to do some repair of leaks, so we could then document how much savings we would get, and then look what was the cost of that program versus what were the savings that were achieved, to see if that's something that would be practical to carry forward. This work would be done through another consultant, not through Stetson, these programs. Stetson did develop requests for proposals to send out to other consultants for these. We took those to the TAC and got feedback on that. We then were waiting for our grant funding agreement to be signed. So we'd put the RFPs on hold until we got the grant funding agreement signed. I think right about the time the grant funding agreement came in, or shortly afterwards, we got some additional feedback from the TACs on our RFPs, and it was significant. The water users that we were targeting, the severely disadvantaged communities, one of the comments was, well, that rebate program may be a hindrance, and that some of these people may not be able to afford to go and buy a low-flow toilet or some water conservation device and then wait for a rebate. They don't have the money to front that, and we checked with some other programs, and they had seen that in the past too. So we took some time to revise the RFP for the water conservation and rebate, and have a component of it that is just an outright installation of water-saving devices, so we could test and see how effective that was. And where we have been, because those changes were made fairly recently, is the issue of the budget and the cash flow came up fairly, in the last couple of months. And we were asked to, as part of that discussion, to look at the parts of the program about what we might consider the program being the complete Prop 1 grant fund program. What might we delay in order to help the cash flow issue? So we have not issued those RFPs until we were comfortable, but the board was looking at the budget and the cash flow, and that they were comfortable where that was going. And the cash flows you've looked at did include these programs going forward, so you have looked at that now. So we would anticipate we would move forward with these now and release these RFPs and come back to the board with the results that we have.
Thank you.
Ron, to
Yeah,
help
please.
with something. This is maybe just a little help for the audience and the board. These SDAC programs are fully funded on Prop 1, fully funded, so it's all being paid for, except for a little bit of our efforts to write the RFPs and things, but basically the whole effort is fully funded by grants, which is good. There was a discussion early on about these were the only programs under the Prop 1 funding where it's potential to get front funding from the state before you did the work. I think we've determined that we're not eligible for that. We looked at it, they said they weren't eligible. As Jeff pointed out, this is all money from the state, no contribution from the authority except for a little bit on the RFPs. However, the point Jeff's making about going slowly right now is that even though it's all funded by the state, if we hire a consultant, they need to be paid. So from a cash flow standpoint, the authority needs to pay the consultant and then get reimbursement. And we didn't want to get out in front of our cash flow situation. So that's the explanation there. The second part of that is because we're working so hard in getting our first reimbursement from the state on our past cost. The last thing we wanted to do is put something in front of the Department of Water Resources, the staff up there, suggesting that we wanted to modify our agreement while they're looking at our first invoice. So we want to get that first invoice processed, and then if there's a need to move this back a little bit in time, we can talk to DWR about that. So that's where we are.
And I just confirmed it is on the expense column as well,
Yeah.
even though we have it on the income column as well.
Yeah.
Is that it, Jeff?
That's all I had.
All right. Public? Anything?
Sophia Merck, I would like to know how much outreach has the GSA done with disadvantaged communities? Thank you.
Any other comment? Jeff?
That sounded like a broader comment than my subject, but I just wanted to point out that the scope of work for these water conservation programs includes the consultant that's ultimately hired coming up with a work plan that describes how are they going to reach out to the community to implement these programs. So, outreach isn't our specialty. Most of these water conservation groups, that's a big part of what they do, is not just the accounting, but the outreach in that. So for these particular programs, it will be built into their work plan.
Thank you. Any other comment from the public? Anything for the board? Okay, hearing none, we can move on to discussion approval of Capital Core Agreement. That's Don and Steve.
Yeah, for the benefit of the board and primarily for the public here, just a little bit of background on this. And of course, we've been having discussions about imported water during this meeting, but I think everybody realizes that is potentially one component of the groundwater sustainability plan. So on December 15th, Stetson Engineers issued a request for qualifications and a proposal for the consulting services of a water marketer to determine available water supplies and provide potential funding sources to support delivery and infrastructure to this region. 4 responses were received, and at the January 17th board meeting, each of those respondents gave a presentation on their qualifications and their approach. The board decided or the board appointed staff to put together a committee to evaluate those proposals, those 4 proposals. The committee was to consist of members of the PAC, the TAC, including the PAC and TAC chairs, staff, water resource manager, and a member or members of this board. So at the first meeting was held through a conference call on February 12th, and the 4 proposals were evaluated by that committee. That committee determined that the proposal that addressed the needs of that RFP the best was from the Capital Core Group. Following that discussion, the water resource manager developed a list of what we call principles that would be included in an agreement, and there was an arrangement for a meeting the following day on February 13th. Members of the Capital Core Group actually drove to Ridgecrest and were present at that meeting. The committee was whittled down to 5. The ad hoc committee was whittled down to 5 members. Board Chair Ron Kosinski, PAC Chair Dave Janis, TAC Chair Adam Bingham, myself, and Steve Johnson. We reviewed those principles, got response to those principles from the Capital Core Group representatives. The recommendation was presented to the board at the next meeting, I'm sorry. At the February 21st meeting of the Groundwater Authority, staff recommended the board direct the general manager and the staff and legal counsel to work on the Capital Core Group agreement and bring it to this board for approval and execution at this meeting. Following comments at the February 21st meeting from the board, there were changes made to the scope of work, and also a revised budgetary figure was provided to the Water Resource Manager and to myself for review. We provided comments. Those comments were incorporated, and then those revised documents were provided to the ad hoc committee for review. There was a conference call on March 12th. At that time, Council Jim Worth recommended, we were provided with the draft agreement, but Jim Worth recommended that to make it easier and faster, the best way to do this would take an existing agreement that the Groundwater Authority had already approved, that being the one with Stetson, use it as a template and modify it to fit the proposal by Capital Core. So after some back and forth with Capital Core, a final agreement was completed, and those documents are in the board packet. There's also a submitted proposed budget with projected tasks and hourly rates that total $229,475. There's also a second budget that's been provided in the amount of $11,800 for travel expenses associated with the Groundwater Authority RFP, bringing the total to $241,275. Of course, the question that's been brought up is, how is this going to be paid for? There is a slide I had to put up. I don't know if he's still there, Gary. Anyway, in the package that was put together by Mr. Worth on the pumping fee assessment, there was included in that a contingency amount of $227,265. It's listed under reserve. There's also $165,500 in administrative costs. As you can see, they're broken out various items. There may be opportunities to shift some of those administrative costs to cover this, what's required for this contract. Admittedly, in looking at our finances, using that contingency for this leaves very little room for any other contingencies that should come forward. But we're facing a deadline of January 31st of 2020 to have a plan in place, and as we've discussed already, and although some may be skeptical of the availability of imported water or even getting it here, building the infrastructure, staff recommends, I personally believe we have to do the due diligence. We can't just assume and think that we can't get it or think that we can't afford it. We need to do the research and find out that what is the cost, what are the options, and then make a decision going forward. So staff recommendation is to approve the contract, the agreement, and the scope that was proposed for Capital Core to go ahead and investigate potential sources of imported water and determine the costs, and also look at potential funding resources to pay for those costs.
Is that it, Don? You all set?
I'll take questions. We have representatives from Capital Core here if there are questions for them directly.
Steve, did you have any comment to make before we?
No, except only other thing which we've talked about earlier was that one of the first things we do, I think, would be sit down with Capital Core and their folks and the ad hoc group, the five of us, and brainstorm to make sure we're all going the right direction. So that's an important step. And the next step would be, even though we're planning, you may be authorizing a scope and budget here, the intent is that work would be done by Capital Core on a task order basis. So through that committee, it would be managed through that committee, through Dawn as the leader, as the manager of that committee. So task would be prepared and authorized on a task order basis so you can manage your costs.
Okay. I see, looking through their response, and they changed the way the order of the task and what happened in the task. And I've highlighted a lot of things. I'm not going to go over them, but it looks like they've addressed the issue of of what I've heard from the public and what I've heard from some of this board, that we step into, can we do it? How much is it? Who can it come from? And so we'll eventually get to a point where, and I'm going to ask this question of them, if we get to the point where the costs or something and this board or public says this isn't feasible anymore, then we just stop what we're doing. But it looks like you've adjusted the tasks accordingly. I know that Inyo had a lot of concerns about the way the tasks were going to be done. I see you've addressed those, and so did all of us. And it sort of gets us to those answers that I would be looking for, and I would hope Director Gleason would be looking for, that we would say, okay, now we got some real numbers in front of us and real issues.
Which page are you looking at?
I'm on page 6. I'm just highlighting things that we've gone through. Okay. Yeah. Basically, we're attacking those items to make it easier for us to make a decision because we keep hearing, can we afford to import water? Is it way out of our reach? Is it impossible to do? I would expect that we get enough information just from task 1, mostly task 1 probably, and probably task 2, that we can make that decision. So by highlighting what you addressed from our major concerns, it appears that's what we're getting. And of course, my question I wrote here was, what if the board says no to water purchase or leasing and we're done with this thing at some given point? And I believe your contract has an out in it, does it, Jim, or 14 or 40 days or something like that. I'm not saying we're going to go there, but it leaves that option open. If this is so outrageous, it's something that we can't continue with. So that's my comment. I suppose you ought to come up in case you get some questions from the board.
I think our intent is when they stop work, they stop getting paid. So if you stop their work, yes.
Yeah.
Where in that agreement is that task order structure for performing the work? I was looking for it. It didn't jump out to me, so I'm wondering, just to make sure that we're not signing an agreement that lets them do work until we terminate the contract kind of thing.
It's in there. Hang on.
I see it actually. Now that I look again, it's page 2 right there at the bottom. Okay. Thank you.
It wasn't easy to spot. It was written by lawyers. Oh, sorry.
Good job, Joe.
Thanks.
Sure.
Does the board have any other comments or such? I see that both gentlemen are ready to take any questions. So if you have any, please do.
I have questions more for our task management of this contract. In the sense of, we already have some conceptual data on sources and costs. And my question to the board is, should we be putting those conceptual costs for not only the source and the actual water per acre foot, but also the infrastructure required, should we be putting that to the TAC or the PAC to have them look at that concept and say, yes, this is, and translate those costs into fees or potential fees or hypothetical fees, however we felt like structuring them. Should we be putting that to the PAC to ask the question up front, are we even in the ballpark, before we start going forward with specific tasks on this contract? I mean, we've got a cash flow issue. I agree that we need to do our due diligence to see if import is actually possible within the economic and legal and political constraints of this basin. But I'm wondering, do we have enough information right now to make that initial decision? And if we don't, do we think the TAC or the PAC could actually answer that question for us and come back to us before we start spending more money down this road? That's my kind of general thought to this board.
Well, my belief is that, conceptual versus actual. I mean, we're at the point now where we want to get some actual numbers. I think that anything that the TAC or the PAC or Stetson, including what would be an additional cost outside of what we're already doing to start going deeper into this, is going to be conceptual. And I for one, don't like to bring out, for instance, cost per ratepayer of the district based on a conceptual number. I'd like to know something more actually what's going to happen. And don't forget, as Jeff said, with his conceptual numbers, that include capital investments and everything. When you start pulling out the possibility of these being paid for potential grants from the feds, the state, or whatever may be available, and that's what we're going to learn here. That's what I'm hoping to learn here. And correct me if I'm wrong. And so I think it's time that we start getting some actual figures and numbers to work with and get away from the conceptual. That's just my belief. If you guys want to introduce yourselves so everyone knows who they're talking to.
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Simonetti. Thank you again for the opportunity to present our proposal. And I think one of the things that I wanted to mention, just to put a little bit more context on the item that we changed, specifically in task 1, one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we did up front within 120 days, and that's one of the items that we had made the change to, is to provide you with a technical memorandum to answer some of the questions that Director Vallejo had addressed last month, to say what specifically are the potential ways that we can bring water in if the board makes that decision. What are the actual costs that we were talking about associated with that? And then what are the potential challenges for each one of those options? So I think the initial way that we had put that together was that wasn't the first priority, and hearing back from the comments that we had heard from last month, that's really what we want to put the priority on in task 1.
So does your scope include infrastructure costing?
We would, in terms of physically determining what the infrastructure cost would be, no. We would be looking to Stetson to help us out for that.
Okay. And does Stetson have any sort of ballpark on what that might cost?
Yeah, that the tech memos, the tech memo that's coming out, and the PowerPoints have all of the estimated construction
conceptual costs.
Conceptual costs, yeah,
Okay.
Based upon other projects. They are conceptual, they're reconnaissance level, but they are based upon other projects and real costs. So,
Thank you. Director Gleason?
Sure, I'll be glad to weigh in. Thank you. Appreciate you coming. This is something I'm glad we're doing. I think we need to wring this out, whether it's real or not real. We need to have sound logic to support any decision we make. This is enabling us to get first in line or close to the front of the line for competing for these water additional augmentation sources. So I'm going to be in favor of this, and I'm hopeful that I get proved wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else from the board? All right. Hearing none, I'll open up to the public.
Good afternoon. Derek Hoffman from Meadowbrook. And I just want to say I appreciate the board considering this opportunity. I do agree this is an important piece of the due diligence for the GSP. It is an important thing to understand at more than just the conceptual level, so that the board can make, as you mentioned, Director Gleason, about an informed decision for what your options are and the feasibility of those options. I see this concept of importing water as possibly growing the pie or making the pie available, if you want to call it that. It's a simple analogy, rather than trying to carve up a smaller pie. And so evaluating imported water and its feasibility is a very important piece to that decision, and also will help address many of the concepts that have been discussed today about growth and supporting all the uses in the valley. And so I appreciate you considering this. I think you found a reputable group, a capable group to look into the questions and provide you with analysis. And I would encourage you to keep an open mind and don't look for the exit ramps too soon. Let's look and see what they can come up with and let them finish their due diligence so we can all understand it. I think it will be a benefit to all the users in the basin to understand these questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wes Kassenstein, domestic well owner. And there's something else I think in the background here that's very important, and that is really what is the value of the water that's still in the ground. We all seem willing to offer to one degree or another to use that water as a ramp down for agriculture. Let's continue draining it. There's some concern about, a real concern about, we really don't know what amount of that water is brackish and unusable. And I think as we look to imported water, we'll find out in a very real sense what that water in the ground is worth. And how cavalier do we want to be in allocating that water as we're seeking imported water, as or perhaps we don't find imported water. That water in the ground is our ace in the hole. It has a very real value. This might even enter into the question of growth. It's pretty clear we need to, in this town, we need to protect the Navy. We need to have proper growth as needed to protect the Navy. Anything beyond that may put us all at risk. And so the cost of this imported water, if we are able to achieve it and when, is important from that point of view too. And particularly as it would help us evaluate the value of the water we have in the ground, which we might sacrifice for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Hearing none, I have one question. I'm not even sure you can answer this. Let's just say that everything bears out, that the recommendations, everything come forward, the board says, boy, this looks really good, and we pull the trigger on starting everything. What kind of time frame are we looking at? I know that's come up here before. Is it 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? What's time frame on everything? And I know I'm probably asking you to look into a crystal ball.
Are you saying time frame on?
Let's just say that this board decide, or between Stetson's board, the decision is X amount of water that we need, be it 5,000 acre feet or 10 or 15. And based on the information that you found either people willing to lease, sell, whatever agreement could be made, as well as and Stetson working on infrastructure requirements. If that's brought to the board for approval to move ahead at some particular point, when is the time frame of saying go to when we actually see, through your experience, actually see water?
Sure. It's a bit of a hypothetical question.
Yes, it is. It's very hypothetical. And I usually don't like to ask those because
sure.
they're hard.
And I think one of the things that we tried to address in the way that we put our proposal together is that there are multiple factors that go into that. So, for example, if the money and the infrastructure and everything were in line, if you guys were ready to purchase water tomorrow, I mean, we could. There are opportunities out there to be able to purchase water tomorrow. The limiting factors that I think the district is going to have is how quickly can the infrastructure get built, and obviously the timing as to when actually making those water purchases would take place. So I think the challenge that you're going to have is understanding how long an infrastructure is going to take place, and then when you need that. And to make that kind of decision from that point.
And I figure it's about the best you could do. I don't think you can because I understand these things, that if a decision is made on what type of infrastructure we need, it's got to be costed out. And then, of course, you guys work with, obviously, on funding and such and finding out all that goes into the basket. So you're looking.
To point
yes.
something out there, Todd Tatum. We have worked in the past where we put together a 30-year contract on water coming from Northern California down to Coachella Valley for a large project that was very conceptual. So there was a long period of a very modest option payment, but they were able to contract that water, take it to LAFCO to get annexed into the water district down at Coachella Valley Water District, and were able to use that contract showing that they had secured the water. So
what you're saying, you can secure the water and then put your infrastructure in to get it when you're ready for it. Okay. Yeah. That's all I've got. Anything else from the board or questions? Okay, so I guess the recommendation is that we approve moving forward with this in the contract. Okay. So I'm going to entertain a motion.
So moved.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Okay, next agenda item, update on outreach efforts. And I believe that I asked that to be put on here because I think it's important that the public, first of all, reach out to us as a board, that if there's people you want us to talk to or information you need, and then also understand that I myself have been putting myself out there. I've already spoken at 2 clubs. I'm going to speak at more if necessary. I'm a firm believer in the outreach, and it's got to be done on every level. But I'm looking forward. I would like to see the public come to us or come to me. Call me. You got my email. You can get my phone. Get the water district. Let me know where you want me to be when. I think it's so important for a lot of reasons. And number one is let's correct some misconceptions. And I think that's probably the main thing. And then also, and I think Sam brought it up when it comes to the severely disadvantaged, where are we headed with that? I don't want to drop off the radar with that. That's in the future. It's going to be looked at. I think people need to know that. So that's why I asked us to put on there. So, and then I believe Don has moved forward on an item as well.
First Did you want to mention the meetings that you had first?
Yeah, I met with the Republican Women already and the Exchange Club, and there's 3 other clubs that have contacted me. I haven't got anything set yet, but again, the word started getting out there that I'm putting myself out to go ahead and do those talks. So again, I'm asking you, if you know someone who, and I don't care how big or small the group is, I'll talk to them.
Okay, a couple things that we've done. As the general manager of the Water District, I do write a quarterly column. The last column, I submitted a column last week that was published already in the Daily Independent on the weekend edition, and it was submitted to the News Review also. The subject of that was the Groundwater Authority, what's going on, and kind of encouraging people to get engaged. The other thing this weekend at the fairgrounds is the Home and Leisure Show, and the Water District will have a booth there. We'll be there available to answer questions not only related to the Water District, but if there are questions that come up about the Groundwater Authority, we will be there to answer some of those as well. And then you'll recall at the board meeting last month, I put forth a draft of a postcard, an oversized postcard to go out as an outreach effort. There were comments made by this board as well as the public, some of which have been incorporated in a revision. We've submitted it for printing. It is ready to go, but the one thing that we needed resolution to was the site for the PAC and TAC meetings. It's in your packet, and we're going to put it up on the screen for the benefit of the public. But so I need resolution on that issue. It was included in the budget as a non-budgeted item. I mean, per se, we don't have it funded, but if you approve the budget, so I'm looking for direction from the board. Where do you want those meetings held? And we will make the postcard, make the changes to the postcard as appropriate. So open that up for discussion.
Well, it was approved at a budget, so I don't know if I need to ask for approval to. I know Mick has been wanting to have, Director Gleason has been wanting to have the meetings here, so they're actually videoed and such, and I can't disagree with that. I mean, there's an expense to it, and it's already in the budget. So, do I need to ask the board to move forward on a decision on that, or just make the fact that we approved it in the budget, we just move ahead with it? And that's unless another board member wants to have a vote, I believe it's approved.
It's in the budget, and having recently taken the effort to try to listen to a lot of those meetings, it's very difficult in the current status with no markers for what discussion's happening when, and hours of conversations, and not knowing who's talking or where they're coming from. Often, I think having it here is important. I think we've already approved it. So. Okay.
Sure. We talk about how important outreach is. Well, putting it on TV is the best outreach we can do. Why would we not do this?
Okay.
Okay, so I will make the changes to the card, and we'll get that out
right
as soon as possible.
And can all the scheduling be done in time for the first meeting in 2 weeks?
Yeah. The postcard's ready to go. I just need to make that change and submit it back.
I'm just asking you. I guess I'm looking at Ron saying, can they be scheduled in for their first meeting that quickly?
We should look at it. We'll see.
Okay. So the answer is yes. Thank you.
Okay, then I was going to defer to the PAC chair to discuss the outreach effort.
Yeah, we're coming up on the discussion from both the chairs, and let's go ahead and cover the PAC first. I believe you talked about outreach and such in there for the de minimis well owners, right?
Yes, so you want to combine
let's
this portion of it with our report?
I believe that we'll be talking about some outreach efforts in your report as well, so let's just move ahead with the PAC report. Unless, hang on, I see we got some comment from the public on outreach. So before we go to the reports, please come forward. Sam, I still think you should just sit up front.
Sam Merck, Sophia. I applaud the efforts of trying to do the outreach. However, I think that you should be looking at some of our senior citizens. They don't use the computer. They may not look at some of the stuff. And so going to the organizations would be really helpful. For instance, going to the senior citizens and having lunch with them, sitting down with them at lunchtime in Inyakern and in Ridgecrest, going to your service places and talking with the veterans. They're disabled. A lot of them are disabled. And you would be hitting two things at once, the disadvantaged community plus being a real outreach program. And another thing that is confusing, you look at even the agenda, it says it starts at 10 o'clock. Well, very seldom does it start at 10 o'clock. It usually starts at 11 o'clock because you guys are having closed meetings. And it's difficult for senior citizens to come, and people need to look at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Elaine Mead again. If I could offer just one piece of advice on the card that Don has done, along with staff. It states that the public meetings are conducted, and then goes on to say when and where and what they are. We understand that public meetings means you can come and listen and talk and do whatever, but not everybody understands that. They think it's a public meeting, I can go and sit and listen. I think it would be nice if you extend that sentence to include that you're inviting people to come and attend and participate. That would kind of bring to the forefront of this that here's what we're doing as the GA, and we'd really like you to come and participate with us, rather than just saying what you're doing. Thank you.
Does the third item there not address that issue?
Well, it says that number 3 says that part of what Sigma requires is to provide opportunities for community input. It doesn't say that you are providing it. It says that the GSA requires that. So a fine line, I'm just saying maybe a more verbal invitation.
Don, I think that's pretty, that one says that the public meetings are conducted. Why don't you put, somewhere in there, public meetings or input from the public, something. Just
interactive public meetings.
Interactive public meetings, any word like that. I don't want to get into wordsmithing this. I think they did a good job to keep it simple and this is a start as well for something. So thank you. Are you looking for approval from the board I think we already agreed you're going to send something out and this is going to be it. Okay.
Yeah, you already agreed. I just wanted to show you what we've come up with, and we did incorporate some of the comments from the last board meeting. So the big issue, of course, was making sure that we finalized where the committee meetings were to be held, and that's been resolved.
Thank you.
Ron, one more question. Lauren, did Larry bring you the check I gave him?
No? Larry, you're in trouble wherever you are.
He was on the road to Las Vegas a week ago, I know that.
He didn't spend it there, I know.
Okay, thank you. Just so everybody knows, so everyone knows, I believe this is a contribution for public outreach through these mailings, and I want to thank you personally. On behalf of Mojave, the statue. I personally want to thank him. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All you other people need out your checkbooks. Just kidding. All right, Dave. Time for your report.
Okay, you had asked that we actually normally we weren't going to read these reports anywhere. We might highlight a couple things, and I was asked in the pre-meeting that we highlight an item that related to number 11, the public outreach, and that was in fact the request from the GA that the PAC go back and take a look and help them advise the GA on how to do better connection with the domestic well owners and get voluntary registration primarily. Of course, many of them are de minimis, some are not. Many of them don't know whether they are de minimis or not as well. So the ad hoc committee went off. It took a couple months for us to polish this with some good input we got in between, but you'll see it as a 2-pager attached to the PAC report. I'll highlight the beginning of it is where the ad hoc committee and the PAC itself did its due diligence with regards to what are the rules about what we can and can't say, what we can and can't ask of them, how we can do it, et cetera. And that's background information. It's due diligence. It is the underpinning of a recommendation that on the following page is not, we did not craft the message itself. What we gave you was a list of, we wanted to focus on positive engagement, particularly to capitalize and perhaps correct some of the missteps we made initially in some of the contacts, or at least the perception of those with the public, and in particular domestic and small well owners. So we came up with a list of 8 positive benefits that are there in the middle of the final page that outline particular things that a communications professional could use to craft what it means to these folks to be involved, what a benefit of voluntary registration might be to the community as a whole in trying to supply information to do the modeling, to set the sustainable management criteria, and in fact that one of those criteria, a criterion may very well be, and is planned in the TAC, they're already looking at this, is the effect on shallow wells, which was talked here earlier today, and that might even include on shallow wells that have definitely gone dry because of the pumping and not poor maintenance or whatever, that there might be some mitigation. So in those 8 items, I want to point out number 3 says registration will provide data on individual wells needed by the GA, not only to do those other things we talked about, but to provide grants to well owners. Now that was not meant to imply there are existing grants and that every one of them would achieve them. There are the potential for that, and it gives us the data perhaps to go in to gather the grants or other methods of payment that may be able to mitigate the impact to the well owners, plus the upfront piece of it in filling out the data in the model and setting the sustainable criteria that could be to their benefit. So our recommendation was twofold. Right above this, we said, first, you need to go back and make contact with everybody in the valley, period, in a more positive manner. And I think you're starting that with what we just talked about with the general manager's contact, but it needs to be more personalized, perhaps downstream. Do we get out and do individual one-on-one? That's a question. But we referenced back to the communications guide that the PAC had delivered last summer that gave you multiple options on how to do that and methodology. And we just wanted to reiterate in this that overall engagement first, and then the second, we armed you with some positive benefits to speak positively about the involvement and engagement of the domestic, de minimis, small, shallow well owners. And then don't forget, it has to be crafted by a professional. It's not our words. So any questions on this 2-page document?
Yes, I do. And then I'll open it up. You make the statement, PAC does not have either the legal protection or authority required to contact the stakeholders. Is that, Jim, is that a correct statement? It states the PAC does not have either the PAC does not have either the legal protection or authority required to contact stakeholders.
Well, I think they could be tasked by the board to do some outreach to the community if the board saw that. I don't know of any legal prohibition that prevents them from making contact with domestic well owners. Or
to our knowledge, we're not elected, nor are we official staff, and covered by any kind of insurance or whatever. That was the concern.
Oh, from a liability standpoint?
Yeah.
I can't answer that. The reason I'm asking is, when it comes to public outreach, the more people we can get to participate, the better. I mean, if it's just me out there talking with people, or just Director Gleason or Don, I mean, we can't go as far as if we allow other people. Now, I know the concern of the board is that, are you saying something you shouldn't say? That's always what's going to be there. But there's no reason that some kind of discussion can't take place with the staff or whatever to say, hey, I'm willing to put myself out there to answer certain questions pertaining to the job we have here. Okay? And I'm just looking for all the participation and public outreach that we can have. So that's why I asked for that's a true statement.
But I think if you're going to have somebody from the PAC or the TAC out in the community speaking on behalf of the authority, then you should actually appoint that person as having authority to speak on behalf of the to speak on behalf of you. Otherwise, you've got PAC members, TAC members
Right.
that might be espousing their own views as opposed to position of the groundwater authority, and that creates its own problems as we've seen in the past.
Okay, you answered my question. I just want to know if it's a potential. I also saw something here, expected occurrence welfare. You mentioned that Kern County records have been inadequate to find all these people. How about Inyo County? What do we have, about 8 to 12 wells in Inyo County that might be affected as shallow wells? Do we know who those are and who they are and where they are? I see Steve nodding that we do.
Yeah, I think we have pretty good data on
Okay,
those.
good. And the other comment I'm going to make, and I talk, Jim, stop me if you want to. I think that indicates that we're looking at the affected shallow wells. That's who we're really talking here. De minimis use have shallow wells that may be effective. In order for us to help give any kind of assistance, besides the fact that some report may come out saying, hey, at this particular year, any well that's shallower than 250 feet is going to go dry, unless we know who those people are. So as a minimum, I think I would request to get the word out there that maybe not, we haven't required registration, but let us know who you are, where the well is, and maybe a well level, just something to open up a dialogue. Because, and I think that's what you're saying here, in order to offer them some assistance,
Yes.
we need the very basics from them. And maybe it's not a registration process because we've already decided not, and I can't make that decision here.
Well, you're not allowed to yet
Right.
for de minimis until
Right.
we have a GSP.
But we can
We
get the
can
word out there.
encourage them to do it voluntarily
Right.
for these benefits.
But I'm not saying full registration. I think the first effort we make is, hey, understand, give us a call, give the water district a call, let us know where your well is, and do you have a level, the last level you had? Steve, that would help to know where these are.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And on this subject, I don't want to get too far off on the agenda.
Yeah, if we get off, let us
I don't want to
know.
get too
Shut
far
us
off,
down.
but I think
Yeah.
it's important that the board and the audience know that there's an avenue being followed right now on the shallow wells.
Okay.
And already submitted to the TAC for comments is an outline that was put together by our office that is intended to be ultimately a part of the GSP that outlines the approach to the technical identification and evaluation of impacted shallow wells.
Okay.
That was submitted to the TAC for technical review coming back. There's a policy side of that too.
Right.
We're planning on getting with David this month for the PAC meeting because we gave the TAC the technical stuff. There's a policy side too that we're going to give some discussion with David to bring it to the PAC to look at the policy side of approaching identification, evaluation, mitigation of not only new wells that might be impacted, but even evaluation of prior impacted wells, how you want to do that. So there is work being done in this area on both sides, technical and policy.
So I just think, receiving this as recommendations, what the board needs to do is excellent. I think that keeping it simple for that, call it first contact, if you will, keep it very, very simple, so at least you know who they are, where they are. And I think the fact that we can offer some help in terms of understanding that through what means may become available because their well is a shallow well affected by the process.
Agreed.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'm just going to have to interrupt. I'm
Please.
going to have to excuse myself. Mr. Snort, we have commitments back in San Bernardino County we have to attend to.
Okay.
Step away. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being in touch.
Drive careful.
One other point, if we're now into the PAC report, if there are any questions on the PAC report, I'd be happy to answer them. I did want to highlight one item in there to be sure it was understood, and that's at the bottom of page 1. It's under item number 5. A question arose in the PAC that from a member that resonated with the public and the PAC, and it resolves around the fact that the briefings we've had to date from Mr. Markman and the other attorneys we've talked about with regards to California water rights, et cetera, are largely based on the definition, case law, historical rights, et cetera. And the question arose in terms of looking at all these alternatives we have before us on how we're going to do management actions in the scenarios. Are there any new authorities that the agency itself is granted under SGMA? And reading of SGMA, it conflicts with itself in some places where it says, no, there are not. Then it goes on to say, but you can do this and that and the other. So it was trying to better understand the full range of authorities that are available under SGMA for us to proceed with management actions and scenarios up for modeling.
I actually had it marked as good question. Now who can answer it is the question. I see what you're saying.
So is this a request to have Mr. Markman brief the PAC on that issue?
Well, it's a request to, it could be a briefing, it could be a document, and the request is not necessarily just to the PAC. It's, we think the GA, the public, and the PAC and TAC need to understand this,
Right.
if to the degree we can.
Well, and this gets back to, in my opinion, the issue of interaction between this board, the TAC, the PAC, Mr. Markman and his work, and how do we integrate that as a coherent whole? Because SGMA does list out a very specific number of authorities that this board can implement, can use to implement regulations in terms of restricting the ability to have one pumper affect other pumpers, and obviously sustainability criteria and establishing what those are, while also, from a layperson's perspective, possibly contradicting itself by saying we're not affecting water rights. But then it goes on to give a brand new way to go through an adjudication process and those issues. My thought in terms of what the PAC, the direction the PAC takes, would be really to help this board understand what the sustainability criteria for this groundwater basin should be in an ideal world, recognizing the water limitations that we have, and then that would be for this board to go digest and weigh against the possibility of potential litigation, potential impacts to the community, potential impacts to other considerations that might be affected by what the policy committee would think would be best in an ideal world, given the constraints that we have.
A comment was made from Director Gleason that possibly this might be something DWR needs to answer, but I would think that we need to craft some pretty specific questions rather than just generally what are the potential new authorities. And if that could be done, I think that maybe there's a way we can get answers to specific questions. And I agree, the more we can bring into the public that people begin to understand it, the better. Because you're just asking generally about new authorities. And I could even begin to say what that is.
Well, they're pretty specific.
Maybe it's principles, authorities, whatever. So if some specific questions could be drafted, we might possibly pass it on for our legal to get to DWR and say, give us these answers if we can't find them.
Can I make a referral to the general manager to take that for action? I'd like to have a letter drafted, prepared, to be sent to DWR to define any new authorities that may be what Mr. Janice is talking about. Do we have a thorough and continuing understanding of SGMA, or are there things in SGMA that are changing that we're unaware of? And if so, we'd like an update on it.
So, I'm just looking at SGMA itself, and, I'll defer to legal counsel to talk about whether we want to go to the DWR to answer this question, but it's 10726.2, additional authorities of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And 10726.4, additional authorities of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And maybe that's probably the more appropriate one. The Groundwater Sustainability Agency shall have the following additional authority and may regulate groundwater extraction using that authority. And it lists 1 through 4. That is essentially, in my understanding, where our regulation authority exists. It talks about spacing requirements for well constructions, controlling groundwater extractions to avoid potential negative impacts. This is all, I think, being built into our potential GSP plan, GSP avenues of how we're going to regulate this water. I'm not sure going back and forth with DWR about what our authorities are going to help. I think, and again, this is just one board member here, what we really need is to determine what our sustainability criteria looks like. What are the priorities of this community for using this water in this basin, given the constraints we have? And then we can build our regulations based off of those sustainability criteria. That's what I think really we need input on the PAC from. The PAC knows, or can quickly be made aware that, hey, we can require spacing between wells to avoid impacts. We can limit the ability of certain wells to produce above a certain amount because that will impact neighboring wells. We can do those types of things. Now, how should we implement that authority to best address, again, our sustainability criteria in this basin? And
well, that's why I was asking, can we get a specific question out of this comment that you brought up, Dave? Is there a specific question from your group that they want answered? And if so, that's a different story than just being very random about are there new authorities out there that have been decided?
Well, this came out of the previous PAC meeting where the concept of retirement or fallowing or some of those came up. I would say that some of the suggestions that Director Vallejo just brought up are at the margins compared with solving those are almost new well questions, and some regulation is of existing, but the magnitude of the problem we have to solve says we have to drastically change pumping even with imported water in this valley. So the retirement ceremonies, and that's a word that was used to cover what I think was meant to be fallowing, that is apparently taking place under some of the groundwater authorities in the San Joaquin Valley. Is that one that could be considered? Is there condemnation authorities? What are the ramifications of those? Those are the kinds of questions. What are the scope of alternatives that we may or may not have that Sigma provided above and beyond historic water rights?
I think there may be legal issues that haven't even been decided yet in what you're
saying.
Well,
that's where I actually expect most of this goes. Those are going to go to court, probably, those actions.
Yeah, and asking what Director Gleason did, I think it would be important for you to, before we go, to sit with Don and try to clarify what you're really looking for.
Okay,
if possible.
Don is on the PAC, so perhaps we can bandy around some ideas at the next meeting in 2 weeks on this.
I mean, if there's something brand new out there we don't know about, I'd be surprised, but you never know. Okay.
So could I ask for clarification? Is there direction from this board to write a letter to DWR?
That was a referral I made, and I stand by it. We need a letter. You can waste that. You can spend that time developing the questions. If they need to be more clearly articulated, that'd be fine. But if there are any changes to authority,
sometimes we pick on a group, and we shouldn't be picking on them. We all moved here. We all knew that this was a desert. We all have concerns about the water. But let's try to be respectful of everybody's rights as a private inholder, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Wes Katzenstein, just put a bit of my perspective on the question that Mr. Janis phrased so well for us for the PAC. Right now we're seeing the behind-door meetings happening with the lawyers of the major pumpers. And the rumblings we're hearing from that, I think seem to be basically positive. Certainly some things that I'm uncomfortable about. But right now, it seems like the ship is being steered, at least as far as the family of ideas that are being considered, by the pre-existing water rights that the major pumpers have. And I think you guys are doing a good job. You're doing the right thing to have those considered. If I were you guys, the whole goal of this Markman meeting, I think, is to avoid litigation. I think that's the right approach to take. From the point of view of avoiding litigation, I think you guys would want to know what you could lay on the table in this dialogue that would presumably survive litigation in the world as we know it today. So that's what I think you guys would want to know. That's why I think the question that Mr. Janis brought forward was posed in the PAC meeting. And of course, as a representative of domestic well owners, I'm certainly interested in knowing, if somehow push came to shove and it appeared there might be litigation, what strengths do we have that might be new that we should be aware of? And I understand that this may not be known until something happens in some various court proceedings. But I think if I were you guys, I would want to know, when the Markman meetings are done, what strengths do you appear to have that might survive in a court of law if push came to shove in that direction? So that's why I think you guys would want to know the answer to that question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Judy Decker, and I'm also a PAC member. And way back when you were discussing public outreach, and I know that Ron has gone and talked to some groups, but then you talked about the domestic well owner registering and the need for that and so on and so forth. You're the board. You chose yourself. You were appointed by your various organizations you were elected to. And I think it might be worthwhile if you talked about it amongst yourselves and went out and talked to the domestic well owners, the ones that you want to register. Have a get-together at the Inyo Kern Town Hall or at the Senior Center. Don't send Mr. Worth or one of the other attorneys. You guys go. Have it rather informal and make a little presentation, but then just talk to them in a relaxed manner. You got off to a really poor start. Was that last year with your senior center deal? Maybe you'll have to have more than one because the building, neither the senior center nor the town hall are very big buildings. But go out there to them. Don't expect them to come in here to you. And don't sit up front like a board. Be more casual. That's my suggestion.
Thank you. Do you have a comment, John?
I was just going to remind the board that that's an outreach discussion. We're now talking about, signal rights, so we need to stay on point.
We sort of blurred that a little bit when we got the
kind of went
reports
backwards
from
a little
TAC,
bit.
yeah.
Yes, I agree.
But I think we're done anyway, so we're ready to move on to the TAC report. And is there anything you want to say before you get questions, Alan? Adam?
Thank you, board members. No, I don't have anything to state at this moment, but I am here to answer any questions that you may have or comments on the report that I gave.
You know me, I always have a question.
Yes, you do.
When I looked at the reports, and I believe I talked to Jeff about this before you left, a lot of the calculations being done for some of the scenarios presented included transevaporation, about 1,700 acre feet or so. And that you basically went ahead and said, here's the recharge, let's get rid of transevaporation and what we have flowing to salt wells. And the question I had is, if I remember correctly, that the USGS study about when they came up with a number for recharge, and remember they did theirs based on a very wet year and a dry year and came up with a middle number, included transevaporation. So I'm wondering whether we have that number in there twice. Is it already calculated within the expected recharge based on the reports? And I haven't seen if there's any other reports you've been looking at, but I do remember the presentation talking about transevaporation. And so I'm wondering whether the recharging, I don't know if it included the Salt Wells Valley, but I do remember transevaporation. And I may be wrong. I just want someone to look at it and tell me I'm wrong, that it's already in the recharge number of 7650, whatever you're using, or it's not.
Yes. We'll verify it for you, Ron, but it is. I'm confident it is not being counted for twice.
Yeah. I agree with that confidence.
It is
we
in
do
the
have that property
recharge
set.
number.
It's not in the, that's a net recharge number.
Okay.
It's already
Yeah.
taken out.
If you're looking specifically for evapotranspiration, perhaps in the playa zone that's not nearby the mountain front recharge zone,
Okay.
yes, they did do proper work to identify that based off of things that are growing there, their depth of growth, how much water that they use and can access, and then what can be evaporated properly when it's at the surface. They have gone through those.
Okay.
It was within the model.
So you answered my question. I'm done with that one.
But we are happy to also ask that as well, just to verify, and then we
Okay.
can get DRI's response.
Because I was I thought I kept a copy of the report from the USGS. I wasn't able to find it, so that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions for Adam from the board? Nothing? Public for attack?
For attack?
Attack. Public attack. Sam, I'm telling you, we need to sit up front.
I need my exercise. Sophia Merck. There is new data available on the SIMA station that was being supplied by the Eastern Kern County RCD. So you might take a look at those new numbers on transpiration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Boy, you got off easy. All right. So we're on to the general manager's report.
Okay, I wanted to mention that yesterday in this room, yesterday morning, was the presentation of the draft hydrological conceptual model report that's been in the making since the SkyTem data was collected in November 2017. But I need to make a distinction because Stetson has a hydrological conceptual model they are using for development of groundwater sustainability plan. It's different than this one. But I refer to it as a hydrological conceptual model because that is specifically one of the deliverables of the Stanford Groundwater Architecture Project. So the one we're referring to is being developed by Rambo. So yesterday we had a presentation. Tim Parker, our consultant, did the lion's share of that. But we also had on the phone available to contribute Max Halkier and Paul Thorne from Denmark. They were on the phone and were available to answer questions. So it was pretty well attended. It was streamed live, so I don't know how many people watched it, but it has been recorded. And if you didn't get to see it, it's not that long. It was kept to 2 hours. Tim kept it under 2 hours, so it'll be available on the city's website. It wasn't there this morning, but I'm sure it'll be up in due time. And I'd encourage anybody who's interested to watch it. A couple other things just to mention in the interest of time. I'll try and keep it brief, but just some agenda items for next month that I picked up. First of all, we want to make sure that we capture the future responsibility for financial duties on the agenda for next year. Also, on the dais in front of you, when you sat down, there was a copy of the audit report that covered the period through December of 2017. Talked to Thomas Young with Brown and Armstrong. He'll be available by phone to go over that audit and answer any of your questions. So between now and then, if you'd review the report, he'll actually go over it by phone. We didn't want to pay him to come here for a brief presentation, but that'll be on the agenda. There's been some suggestions about the Groundwater Authority having a logo. I know it's not a big deal, but on letterhead and such, we have a local person that's putting together some concepts, and we may bring that to the board as an agenda item next month. And then lastly, just an announcement, the Water District's administrative assistant, person who also has responsibility for human resources, is retiring August 1st. So as is our practice, we look for our internal candidates first. We did get some applicants, and we selected Lauren Duffy to take over that position. It is a key position, so we wanted to have somebody available to train, if you will, with the existing administrative assistant over the next few months, so that when August 1st comes, it's a seamless transition and Lauren hits the ground running. She's actually been serving as a backup for quite a while now, so it should go very smooth. So as part of that agreement, Lauren is to stay on in her current function as clerk of the board till the end of this year, and it will give the opportunity for her successor in that position to train with her for 5 months to take over this responsibility. And I don't think this responsibility was the motivation for her to apply for the other job, but it is a step up, and we don't want to hold anybody back, obviously. So Thank you. I think we all appreciate the job Lauren has done for us and will continue to do for us through the end of the year.
So we need, for the next 5 months, we need to make it really tough on her? Here? Okay. Any questions or comments from the board on what Don had to say?
She has shielding.
Any comments or questions from the public for Don? All right. Hearing none, closing comments. Let's start down. John, anything?
Nothing.
All righty. Scott?
No comment.
No comment. Nick? Any comments, John? Anything down that end?
Just, I think you guys got a lot done today. Really did.
I may have set a record here. We're actually, what is this, 111? No, I know it's 211. I realize that. No, I have no comments. I just want to thank everybody for coming. I appreciate the public participation and keep it up. Thank you so much. With that, we're going to close the open session and we're going to move into closed session.